Setsuna lay sprawled across the ground, staring at the ruined world around him. Destruction pressed in from every direction, and for a moment he wondered if humanity had already lost. Vidrak sneered above him, voice heavy with scorn, declaring that all their struggles had been meaningless. But Setsuna refused to let the end arrive so easily. With the last scraps of strength in his body, he drove his fist forward in a simple, desperate punch. To his own shock, the strike landed. The death god actually staggered, even if only slightly. A low-level close combat blow had broken through, something even the death god's power could not instantly erase. Yet his body was finished. He felt it failing, too weak to rise again. Vidrak raised his weapon for the final strike, taunting that the playtime was over. That was when the pendant at Setsuna's chest began to glow. The gift from his headmaster, its light returned to his mind like a memory. The emblem of resurgence, his headmaster had called it, carrying within it the spirit of the tower. A relic that could undo a single regret. At the time, Setsuna had scoffed. He had lived his life without regrets, so why would he ever need it? His headmaster had read his thoughts then, smiling knowingly, telling him that the day might come when he would. Now, bleeding and broken, Setsuna admitted the truth. His one regret was never choosing the path of the close combat mage. If he had, perhaps this battle would have ended differently. Next time, he swore, he would crush Vidrak. In a flash, the battlefield was gone. He awoke with a start, his head jerking up as Leo smacked him awake. A familiar voice told him it was his turn. Setsuna blinked in disbelief. Leo, alive. The very same Leo who had vanished before the death god appeared. The classroom stretched out around him. He was back at the Mage Academy, 10 years earlier, the day of his bitter failure. The ritual of choice. Leo called out again, asking why Setsuna was spacing out in the middle of the ceremony. Heart pounding, Setsuna rose and walked toward the front where the teachers and the headmaster were waiting. Whispers filled the room. One girl muttered that Setsuna was here. Another whispered back that he carried talent for multiple paths. The examiner's book opened, glowing with soft light. Setsuna remembered what came next, choosing a path. Each one carried its own arsenal of spells. But once chosen, a path bound the mage tightly, making it nearly impossible to walk in others. It was like trying to follow two religions at once, impossible to reconcile. The examiner stood in front of Setsuna, asking which path he would specialize in. He showed his own ability with certainty, convinced Setsuna would choose the same. Setsuna paused. Under normal logic, he would have chosen ranged magic, the craft of shaping elements, firing mana at enemies, and wiping out groups with large-scale spells. It kept distance, reduced risk, and built power quickly. Anyone choosing it could rise to become the strongest mage, but strength like that would still fall short against the death god. When he turned away from the ranged option, silence broke into shock. Leo, standing nearby, couldn't understand it. Everyone expected Setsuna to reach for ranged magic. Instead, he chose melee, the path considered useless. The examiner explained without hesitation that melee magic was nothing more than body reinforcement. Outdated, crude, limited to close combat. He compared it to standing under a rain of arrows with nothing but a rock to shield yourself. He asked if Setsuna really wanted to destroy his future with such a choice. Setsuna already knew the consequence. By walking this path, he erased any chance of becoming a celebrated mage. No recognition, no reputation. But this was the only branch of magic that could give him even a chance against the death god. He wasn't letting that go. The room stayed silent as his choice was confirmed. Faces shifted from confusion to disbelief. Students whispered. Setsuna stayed still. This was the power he needed. A collective gasp spread as the decision locked in. Silas, head of ranged magic, shut his book with a sigh. He admitted he had arranged everything for Setsuna, certain the boy would bring him recognition by becoming the greatest ranged mage. That plan collapsed in an instant. Setsuna didn't care. Silas's ambitions meant nothing. In 10 years, the world itself would be gone. In 5, the death god would appear. No title or honor would stop that. Even carrying the memories of his past life, Setsuna knew he had stepped into something he wasn't ready for. He had no real experience in melee combat, but it didn't matter. Against the death god, this was the only choice that made sense. He had no choice but to master it within 5 years. Once the ritual ended, the students were ordered back to their departments. Setsuna stood there, not even sure where his own classroom was. He searched for Leo but found nothing. He asked a boy nearby for directions, but the kid, with a girl at his side, brushed him off, claiming they were late. Others were already moving in groups, ignoring him, whispering behind his back. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. He knew it, and still, he had to walk it. A voice cut through the crowd saying the rumors about Setsuna being a prodigy were wrong, that maybe he was just an idiot. Another boy added he probably chose melee just to keep the attention on himself. Setsuna thought back to how differently everyone had acted before. The shift was obvious. It was because of his choice. He remembered the map in the central garden and decided to check it. On the way there, the sound of a fireball cut the air. He turned and saw a girl snuffing out the flames with ease. She stood her ground, demanding the boy give back what her mother had given her. 3 of them, ranged magic students. The biggest one waved a brooch, claiming it was an artifact holding mana. Another sneered, saying it was wasted on a commoner like her, that they would use it better. Setsuna recognized her, a student from the melee department. She was standing alone against them. The leader mocked her, saying if she wanted the brooch back, she'd have to take it with her useless melee magic before throwing more fireballs her way. The girl responded with a physical boost, the core trait of melee magic, her body reinforced. It gave her speed and strength, but nothing to close the gap. Against enemies who could stand back and cast at will, it was a losing game. Still, she refused to yield. She shouted that the brooch was her mother's, saved for years, and she wasn't about to hand it over. Mana crackled at her side. A blade of pure energy took form. Setsuna's eyes locked on it, a mana blade. He knew what it was, but he also knew the truth. Against 3 ranged students, it wouldn't be enough. The ranged magic student mocked her, saying she was trembling and doubting she could ever reach him with that short blade. He hurled another fireball, forcing her to retreat. He laughed, claiming it was just as he had predicted. She couldn't even touch them. With a cruel grin, he launched another shot, mocking her life as nothing more than the same, always out of reach. Before the flames struck, Setsuna moved in, dragging the girl out of the line of fire. He asked if she knew the location of the melee classroom and if she could guide him. One of the bullies noticed who it was, Setsuna, and assumed he had chosen melee magic too. The leader's grin widened, calling it good news. Now he could crush him without rushing. Setsuna stood steady. He admitted melee magic was seen as weak, but since he had chosen it, he would bend it to his will. Victory, he said, wasn't decided by the type of magic used. The girl panicked, warning him to stop, reminding him that these were upperclassmen and he would get hurt. The leader ignored her, unleashing another barrage of fireballs, declaring it was already too late. Setsuna focused. Mana channeled into his legs, physical boost sharp and precise. He darted forward, slipping past the fireballs with blistering speed. He thought it would be simple, but then questioned himself. What if he pushed it further? He noticed the boy's reliance on fireballs. Only fire. Nothing else. That had to be his limit. Setsuna called it out, which drove the boy into rage. Shouting at him to shut up, he demanded to know how Setsuna was moving that fast. He swore he wouldn't be beaten. Fueled by anger, the boy conjured a massive fireball with both hands, pouring everything into one blow. Setsuna answered by forming a sword from his mana, cutting through the blazing sphere in a single strike. The onlookers froze. The girl, stunned, asked if it was even possible to cut through a spell. Setsuna explained it simply. Mage battles always came down to control of mana. Even without huge reserves, his precision had always been his edge. He tested the blade, realizing it carried more potential than expected. If he combined speed with raw strength, he might turn it into something sharper. The boy ground his teeth, vowing to unleash something stronger. The fat one told him to stop, and the other warned that if he went any further, an instructor would show up. The boy ignored his companions, refusing to stop. He began chanting, but before the spell could form, Setsuna closed the distance in a blur. His fist, reinforced with mana, slammed into the boy's chest and sent him stumbling back. Setsuna tightened his hand, recognizing how practical that strike would be in close combat. One of the bystanders muttered in disbelief, questioning if melee magic wasn't supposed to be the weakest path. The only difference was that Setsuna was the one using it, yet somehow it carried weight. Setsuna demanded the brooch. The fat boy hesitated, then gave it up, deciding it wasn't worth pushing the fight any further. The two supported their injured leader and dragged him away. Setsuna handed the brooch back to the girl, reminding her of its value. She clutched his hand, grateful, and introduced herself as Layla Rose. She offered her hand with a smile, and he gave his name in return. She shook his hand firmly, remarking that she already knew who he was, famous for his rare affinity with every branch of magic. Then she asked why he had chosen melee. Setsuna paused, unwilling to share the Instead, he asked if she could take him to their classroom. Layla wondered aloud if orientation had already started. Together they ran toward the far end of the academy, where the melee department had been tucked away. Setsuna couldn't help but feel it was deliberate, a reminder of how little value the path was given. As they moved, Layla asked about the mana blade. Could he teach her? Setsuna explained he had simply applied his mana control to the technique. With enough practice, other combat forms should be possible. Since spell disintegration hadn't weakened the blade, mastery of melee magic might give him the edge he needed against the death god. He carried another purpose as well, preparing for the invasion that was certain to come. His thoughts slipped to the past, back to a quiet moment of tea with the headmaster. The old man had removed his gloves, revealing 2 marks etched into his hands. The one on the right was the symbol of summoning magic, but the one on the left was unknown, a design Setsuna had never seen. Setsuna had asked, but the headmaster told him the time would come when he would explain, entrusting him with the secret. That time never arrived. The headmaster was killed not long after the death god appeared. The one responsible was the death god himself, erasing a man whose strength he feared. Setsuna believed that uncovering the secret of the second path of magic might give him the strength to alter the world's fate. Layla guided him to a building, telling him they had arrived. He wondered how he could draw the headmaster's attention through melee magic. The instructor met him with scorn, criticizing him even though he wasn't late. Arriving with the girl only seemed to make it worse. When Layla tried to explain, the instructor cut her off, snapping that the days of bragging about Setsuna's grades were finished. He stepped closer, sneering, and reminded Setsuna that he belonged to the melee division, the outcasts of the academy. Setsuna shoved the man's hand aside, irritated by the pointless words. He asked why a melee instructor would insult the very field he was supposed to teach. The instructor's face twisted. He grabbed Setsuna's collar and demanded to know how he dared to talk back. Setsuna didn't flinch. He told him melee magic had potential. That was exactly why he chose it. The instructor scoffed, certain that arrogance wouldn't last. He turned away and threw out a challenge. If Setsuna really believed in melee magic, he should prove it. Nearby, students were trying to crack a large stone with their spells. One boy staggered back after hitting it, the surface untouched. The instructor barked at them, calling this their first test. Inside every rock was a crystal the size of a fish, and their task was to extract it within the time limit. Failure meant punishment. The clock ticked down. None of the students had even chipped the surface. Complaints spread. The rocks were too hard. How could they succeed when they had barely begun training? One muttered that the instructor was venting his anger at not being promoted. The instructor then called Setsuna out. He pointed at the largest rock and ordered him to show what melee magic could actually do. 10 minutes. That was all. Layla protested, shocked. The rock was bigger than the others. 10 minutes wouldn't be close to enough. The instructor only smirked and held up the timer, pointing out that they had already lost a full minute. Setsuna stepped forward and placed his hand on the stone. The instructor scoffed, asking if he really believed he could manage it. The instructor mocked him, offering extra time if he begged for forgiveness. Setsuna said he would finish it in 10 seconds. The response caught the instructor off guard, and even Layla told him not to be absurd. Zakhtari knew the truth. The rock wasn't only massive, it was dense. He himself would need half an hour to chip away at it. Yet Setsuna didn't back down. He had 10 seconds and nothing more. Setsuna's eyes hardened. He summoned a melee weapon into his grip. If he wanted the headmaster to notice him, he had to rise as the top of this division. He didn't hesitate. The weapon cut across the stone in one strike. At first, nothing moved. Zakhtari shouted that he had expected this. Potential meant nothing. Setsuna was still a student. Then, the rock split apart and collapsed. Setsuna picked up the purple crystal and placed it in Zakhtari's hand, noting that the 10 seconds were enough. Shock rippled through the instructor. Layla was speechless, unable to believe what she had seen. She wondered how he had managed it so easily. The class stared as well. Some whispered that Setsuna might already be stronger than their teacher. One boy even asked aloud if he had surpassed Zakhtari. The instructor dismissed it instantly, accusing Setsuna of using a trick. 10 minutes wouldn't be enough to crack that stone. There was no way it was done fairly. Setsuna's tone stayed cold. If it took Zakhtari 10 minutes, maybe he should sit with the other students and learn. The words cut deep. Zakhtari's face twisted with rage, ready to fire back, But another figure appeared. Lionel grabbed him by the collar. He asked if Zacteri was really bullying his students. His voice dragged with a yawn, saying he had only come because the noise ruined his nap. He told them plainly that Setsuna hadn't cheated. He had sensed the mana lines in the stone and hit its weakest point. Lionel turned his glare on Zacteri, questioning how an instructor could be blind to something so simple. Then Lionel ordered him to demonstrate a mana guard. Dropping into stance, Lionel added that since Zacteri believed in his own lessons so much, he should be able to survive. Zacteri stammered, trying to object. Lionel shoved him anyway, sending him crashing into a wall. Setsuna watched the impact and understood. Lionel had crushed Zacteri's mana guard without effort. The man was on another level. Lionel clapped Setsuna on the back, acknowledging his skill. For melee magic, he said it was more than enough, and there was no need to push himself so far. Setsuna's reply was sharp. He had no intention of losing to any department. He would climb to the top and surpass them all. Lionel let out a short laugh at the resolve. That was the attitude he wanted to see. He asked if there was a spell Setsuna had in mind to learn, offering to teach it if there was. Quietly, Lionel thought back to another student with the same fire in his eyes. He considered that Setsuna could one day stand as the department's representative, but for now, he was still a rival who couldn't be ignored. He gave his name, stating he was the head instructor of the melee division. He welcomed them all and announced that they would already be choosing a representative for the intramural contest, even though it was early. The intramural contest was a fight between the 8 magic departments, each putting forth a champion. Those chosen would clash in a tournament until one stood as victor. Setsuna recalled that in his last timeline, he had won the contest under the ranged division, earning the headmaster's trust. This was exactly why he needed to win it again. Then his eyes caught a fortified stone nearby. Lionel explained that another student had already pulled out a crystal just like him, and not with a blade, but with his bare hands. Both fragments had come from Drago Okard. Drago stepped forward, calling out to Setsuna. He wanted to know why a prodigy like him had chosen the melee path. Setsuna told him he had his reasons. Drago laughed it off and demanded to know what he thought he could achieve with such a weak body. He revealed his own background. Generations of melee mages, 17 years of brutal physical training. Drago flexed his strength, his punch shaking the ground, air cracking under the force. He fixed his eyes on Setsuna, his mouth twisted into a smirk, and threw a strike aimed at his face. It wasn't just a blow, it was a challenge. If Setsuna wanted to represent the department, he would have to prove it. Setsuna answered that the intramural wasn't just raw power, but skill. As the only student marked as renown within the melee division, he was already in the running, and he accepted the duel. Before the clash could begin, Lionel stepped between them. He declared that the duel would take place in 1 week. Drago, clearly displeased, warned Setsuna not to back out. If he called himself a melee mage, then he should fight with honor. As he walked away, one of the boys whispered about who would win, while a girl declared her certainty that Drago would take the victory. Layla turned to Setsuna, asking if he was sure he could actually defeat Drago. Setsuna shook his head. Drago's body, hardened by years of relentless training, was more than he could handle at this stage. Even so, he carried the thought that there had to be another path forward. Layla, confused, asked where he was headed. Her curiosity drove her to follow him. Together, they moved into the forest until they stopped before a massive tree. She still didn't understand what he was doing. Setsuna placed his hand on the trunk, revealing that this was his hidden training ground. Training here multiplied his strength 3-fold. Layla admitted the tree was extraordinary. Setsuna explained it was the world tree, rooted in place for millennia. A green light poured from its bark, wrapping around him. The tree accepted him as one of its own, and he was covered in the glow. Layla stared at the strange aura, and Setsuna told her it was the world tree's blessing, a power that accelerated recovery for those it accepted. He remembered finding this place even before being sent back in time. With the blessing, he no longer worried about mana depletion. He could push his body beyond its limits, enter different states of training, and continue without pause. Layla was stunned, but couldn't forget Drago's overwhelming background. Born a melee mage, trained since birth, he was a wall of muscle and willpower. Still, she felt indebted to Setsuna for returning her brooch. Her way of paying him back would be to spy on Drago. In the melee training hall, students drilled under Lionel's watch. Drago was among them, loading immense weights onto his body. After finishing one set, he asked Lionel if any fortified rocks remained. Lionel frowned, asking if Drago planned to crush every last one. Drago said he wasn't breaking them, just borrowing them. He stacked several heavy rocks across his back and dropped into push-ups. The ground trembled under each repetition. Layla, watching from the edges, wondered if he was even human. She couldn't tell if a punch from him would be something Setsuna could ever withstand. Her thoughts turned to whether Setsuna had any chance at all. Elsewhere, under the world tree, Setsuna sat with a martial arts manual spread open. Layla hurried back to him, frustrated. Drago was in the training hall doing push-ups with 5 fortified rocks balanced across his back, and here Setsuna was, sitting and reading. Setsuna admitted that Drago was impressive, but said that kind of intensity was simply the right level for physical training. He told Layla there was nothing to worry about, that it was part of his plan. His eyes lit with interest. She pressed him for clarity. He explained it came from a spell called Physical Bodybuilder. It hardened the body and sharpened control over nerves through mana. Channeling mana into the legs boosted movement and power. Into the fists increased striking force. Into the brain heightened memory. He tossed the manual aside, saying he had already memorized everything and was eager to test it. Spotting a fallen leaf, he cut it clean with a swift kick. He formed a mana blade and sliced through others hanging above. Layla was startled at how fast he had grasped it. Setsuna muttered it wasn't enough. A sharp pain hit him, forcing him to his knees. Blood welled on his hand. Layla demanded to know what happened, but Setsuna brushed it off. The world tree's green glow wrapped around him. He explained that with the physical boost, he was forcing his muscles to the limit, breaking them down so the recovery would rebuild them stronger. The wound closed before her eyes. She asked if it was really necessary. Setsuna said he had no chance of matching Drago through normal training. Drago had years ahead of him. He had only 1 week. He swore he would repeat the process 1,000 times before the duel. Layla was stunned, asking how he could survive such strain even once, let alone endlessly. Setsuna said perfection wasn't the point. He remembered the time when he couldn't wield magic at all. Back then he trained daily, failed countless times, but never gave up. As long as progress was made, it was worth it. Endurance came from that. They continued training together. During breaks, Layla thought about him. People always called him gifted, but she saw the truth. His strength came from work no one else could match. Now, Setsuna was lifting crushing weight while grinding through push-ups. Finally, the duel day arrived. Setsuna stood across from Drago on the battleground, the crowd thick around them. Drago's voice cut through, mocking that at least Setsuna hadn't run away. Setsuna declared he would not back down. He wanted to stand as the department's representative. Lionel confirmed both fighters were ready, and when their eyes locked, he gave the signal to start. Setsuna rushed forward first, throwing a sharp left hook. Drago caught it on his forearms, using them as a wall, but even then the impact forced him backward. Setsuna recognized at once that Drago had raised his mana guard to take the blow. Drago countered with a punch so heavy the air itself seemed to split, the shock pressing into the crowd until they couldn't even track the strike. When the dust shifted, it was clear Setsuna had slipped out of range without effort. The audience froze in disbelief, questioning if either of them had truly undergone the ritual only a week ago. Setsuna admitted that if that hit had landed clean, he would have been hurt. Drago, grinding his teeth, unleashed a flurry of fists. Setsuna weaved through them, blocking and sidestepping, which only stoked Drago's temper further. Drago barked that hiding behind defense was all Setsuna could manage, mocking his weak frame. Layla doubted the single week of training could be enough for Setsuna to close the gap. Lionel, watching, judged that Setsuna looked to be on the losing end. Drago snapped out a kick, but again Setsuna's guard held. Lionel noted under his breath that Setsuna's use of mana control was guiding the parries, deflecting power instead of taking it head-on. Drago's anger boiled over. He spat that elites like Setsuna always scorned melee magic and raged about his family being treated as lesser for generations because of it. Fury sharpened his edge as he summoned a sword, vowing to put Setsuna down. Setsuna drew his own blade in response. Both surged forward, weapons colliding in a thunderous strike. Drago pressed with rapid cuts, forcing Setsuna to leap and dodge until Setsuna countered with a slash of his own. Drago rebounded, swinging again, and the ground split beneath them as their strength tore into the stone. Charging once more, Drago's face twisted with rage. Setsuna's mind drifted to the words of 2 boys who mocked him for daring to face Drago, for choosing melee magic at all. He steadied himself, telling Drago that he understood his anger, but his own goal was higher. Drago faltered, confused by the words. In that moment, Setsuna broke through his mana-forged sword guard with a precise strike. Drago staggered from the strike, but quickly snapped back and landed another hit on Setsuna. Setsuna shifted into physical boost acceleration, his speed jumping as he countered with a clean blow of his own. Layla noticed Drago beginning to feel the impact of Setsuna's attacks. Lionel observed that while Drago fought with power and control, Setsuna's mana use and physical boosts were matching him step for step. To break through Drago's defense, Setsuna would need to force an opening. Setsuna pressed forward. Drago summoned another sword and swung wildly, rage spilling into the strike. Setsuna sensed the danger and slipped aside. The blade smashed into the ground, breaking it apart. Drago smirked, confident Setsuna's legs wouldn't carry him away forever. He tightened his fists, his fury making Layla wonder what he had planned next. Drago lunged with a crushing punch, but the hit landed on an afterimage. The real Setsuna was already above him. From the air, Setsuna explained that by focusing mana at a point, an afterimage could be created to confuse the enemy. Without pause, he launched forward with full speed. Drago braced himself for another clash, but Setsuna dropped the words to end it and swung down. The slash tore through with decisive force. The crowd went silent, stunned. Lionel watched closely, impressed by how Setsuna used movement to set up the finishing blow. Both fighters had shown remarkable strength. He stepped in, calling the match finished and declaring Setsuna the winner. Drago was on the ground, cut down by the final strike. Layla lit up with relief at the result. Yet, against expectation, Drago slowly rose again. Gasps rolled through the crowd. His endurance was proof of his raw strength, but fury twisted his face. He thought Setsuna had pulled back at the end, holding back the kill. Setsuna offered a hand to lift him. Drago, still burning with anger, demanded to know what Setsuna was fighting for. Setsuna hesitated, then said it was to never lose to anyone or anything, to keep climbing higher no matter what. Drago's expression shifted. He admitted that must be why Setsuna was so strong, and finally accepted the loss. Setsuna told him he had been a worthy opponent, and that his strength would be needed in the coming fight against the Death God. Lionel stepped forward, pointing out that Setsuna must have carried immense determination to fight Drago at such close distance. He lifted Setsuna's hand and announced that by the outcome of the duel, Setsuna would now stand as the representative of the melee magic department. Days later, Lionel guided Setsuna to a chamber, explaining he was about to face the representatives of the other divisions. He admitted he was the last person fit to give advice, but warned him not to stir trouble. Setsuna promised nothing would happen and walked inside where 7 figures waited. A boy with glasses eyed him, questioning if the melee magic department really planned to show up this year. He called it shameless. Setsuna identified him at once. Noel, the enhancement magic representative. Noel closed the distance, pressing his leg over Setsuna's as if to pin him. He mocked that they would meet in the first match, reminding everyone that in 100 years, no melee magic fighter had ever won. He sneered that Setsuna should sit in the corner and lift weights instead. Setsuna stayed composed, shifting his leg to press back, remarking that the enhancement division had a curious way of greeting people. Was this how they did things here? Noel's temper spiked, but Setsuna remained steady, dismissing the past century of failure. He declared that he would take the championship this year. Noel scoffed, telling him to keep dreaming. The door opened and the headmaster entered, smiling at the tension. He remarked that it was good to see such fire, but they should save it for the actual contest. All representatives rose in respect. Setsuna noted how the timing of the headmaster's appearance mirrored his previous life exactly. The headmaster stood before them. A pink-haired woman greeted him warmly, promising to bring pride to him through her performance in the contest. Setsuna recognized her, Carol of the Summoning Magic Department. Cheerful but dangerous, she had been a strong opponent in the previous timeline. He had held back then, but that didn't mean he could take her lightly now. The headmaster congratulated them for being chosen as champions of their divisions. He said it pleased him to see 8 strong students gathered together. Then he explained that the matchups for the intramural contest had already been drawn, and it would be fought one-on-one in tournament form. The opening match was set for the melee magic and enhancement magic representatives. The second would pair healing magic against raising magic. The third would pit formation against summon magic. The final match placed irregular magic against alchemical magic. The headmaster explained that the contest served as a chance to witness other branches of magic firsthand. Battles would begin in 10 days, leaving time for rest and training. He said he looked forward to the results. The students bowed in agreement. As they did, Setsuna felt this was his chance. When the headmaster turned to leave, he called out. The headmaster stopped, acknowledging him as the melee magic representative. Setsuna introduced himself and asked if he could make a request. If he won the contest, would the headmaster allow him to study his magic? The headmaster seemed surprised, pointing out that as a summoner, his arts would hardly help a melee mage. Setsuna pressed, saying he wanted to learn about his second specialization. The headmaster's face hardened, irritation breaking through as he demanded to know where Setsuna had heard of that. The weight of Setsuna's presence was already suspicious, but backing down now was impossible. If the melee magic division won for the first time in 100 years, it would shift how the world viewed them. His request was not excessive. After a pause, the headmaster admitted he saw no ulterior motive and agreed to test him if he claimed victory. Setsuna bowed, thanking him. The headmaster warned the path ahead would be far from easy. Setsuna, unwavering, declared he would win and claim the knowledge. The headmaster walked off, noting the resolve in him. That evening, Setsuna sat alone outside, eating a meal and thinking back over 10 years at the academy. There had never been much to fill his free hours. He made a note to thank Layla for recommending the food. His mind returned to the 10 days left before the contest, sharpening his focus on preparation. Suddenly, a voice cut in, telling him not to bother with preparations. A massive fist crashed toward him. Setsuna caught the blow with his hand, pushed back to create space, and saw his attacker clearly. It was a golem. Noel hid in the shadows, watching everything unfold. He judged the attempt decent, though only possible because he exploited Setsuna's blind spot. Setsuna quickly understood the golem had been conjured by Noel, who wielded the ability to turn life into stone. He wondered what Noel intended next. Noel stepped up the pressure, insisting they should settle things now instead of waiting for the official match against a melee mage. He summoned several more golems to strike from behind, declaring Setsuna would pay for humiliating him. Setsuna stayed calm, pointing out that Noel had brought this on himself. As bells rang in the distance, Noel decided to stop, muttering that it would look bad if others caught him cornering a weak opponent. He dismissed the golems and left, promising to crush Setsuna fully in the upcoming duel. Setsuna noted how skilled Noel was, managing multiple golems at once, but his focus drifted back to the bread he dropped, knowing the meal was ruined. The next day in the melee department, Lionel gathered the students. He announced that before the intramural contest, he would review the battle between Drago and Setsuna. He asked if they had recognized their weaknesses. Both nodded. Drago admitted his control over mana, and emotions had been unstable. When asked, Setsuna stated his physical strength was lacking, and that Drago had overpowered him in that area. Lionel accepted their honesty, stressing that growth required confronting shortcomings. He urged them to target these weaknesses in their training. Layla raised her hand, asking if the match would double as practice for the contest. Lionel considered it a sharp question. He explained that Setsuna's first match would be against the Enhancement Magic Division. From what Setsuna had seen, Noel specialized in commanding large numbers of golems, and since golems had physical bodies, fighting them would not be much different than facing melee opponents. Lionel assigned their drills. Drago was to improve speed, attacking from multiple directions to simulate a group of golems. Setsuna was to focus on blocking and counterattacks. Drago prepared, vowing it wouldn't end like before. Setsuna replied that he expected the same. Drago lunged with a punch, but Setsuna slipped aside. Drago thought he might have expected the strike from the right, yet before Setsuna could react, the second fist connected. Setsuna realized his response had been a fraction too late. Lionel pointed out Drago's balance of speed and power, noting the strength of his defense, then told him to use footwork to counter Setsuna's movements. Setsuna acknowledged the advice, stepped back, and prepared his own punch. Time passed until both fighters lay on the ground, worn out. Drago gave thanks for the bout. Lionel approached, saying their movements had been sharp and that in a few days they should handle golems without issue. He handed them water, and Setsuna, taking a bottle, said he would not lower his guard. Lionel observed Drago's strong foundation and Setsuna's sharp instincts, seeing how fast both were growing. The contest day arrived. Excitement filled the crowd as the host announced the 781st Intramural Contest. Out of the 8 department representatives, only one would stand above the rest. Setsuna and Noel faced each other, ready for their match. The host invited the audience to place their bets. Most backed Noel, scoffing at the idea of wagering on a melee mage. A boy previously beaten by Setsuna walked up. telling him to win and prove who truly held control. In the stands, Akhtar from the Ranged Magic Division arrived, calm despite his own upcoming fight. Everyone knew the winner here would face him next. The host explained that each round would have a stage chosen at random, and for this match, it was the desert. Noel smirked, pointing out how fortune had abandoned Setsuna again. A group of kids in the audience shouted support for Noel, convinced that a melee mage would fall easily. Another boy sneered, saying it felt good to face the weakest department in the academy. Layla, hearing it, shouted back, promising they would regret their words once the fight ended. As she moved toward them, Lionel stepped in, cooling her down. The host called for the battle to start. Noel picked up a stone, asking if Setsuna knew what it was. Setsuna considered that it might be a piece of fortified rock. Noel explained that when the fortified stone mixed with the sand, it produced golems. Right on cue, a creature of hardened rock rose from the ground, blades sliding uselessly against its body. He pulled out a pouch filled with more stones and scattered them across the arena. One after another, golems erupted from the sand. He told Setsuna they would see how long he could last. Layla watched in disbelief at the sheer number of creatures Noel was able to summon. Noel boasted that in the desert, he could create as many as he wanted, and Setsuna's melee magic couldn't even compare. In the stands, one boy declared the outcome obvious while another mocked Setsuna for standing there at all. Noel turned back to his opponent, asking if he had any last words. Setsuna called it disappointing, saying he expected more. The remark caught Noel off guard, but he quickly regained himself and ordered the golems to attack. Dust and sand filled the air as they advanced, and Noel smirked, saying this was the price for daring to provoke him. The audience couldn't see through the swirling haze, left to guess what was happening. Inside the storm, Setsuna drew on his mana, cutting down the golems one after another. He had mastered how to crush them long ago. Gasps erupted from the crowd when the shapes of shattered constructs appeared through the dust, and even Noel was stunned at how easily they fell. He frantically conjured more and sent them forward, but Setsuna stayed calm, moving toward him. In close quarters, melee had no equal, and golems with stiff, predictable moves were nothing but targets. He sliced through again, driving Noel into panic. Noel screamed that he could summon more, but Setsuna pressed forward. He reached him, muttered about luck running out, and drove a punch into his body, sending him flying. Some in the crowd couldn't tell what had just happened. Others admitted they couldn't see anything through the haze. When the sandstorm thinned, the victor stood clear, Setsuna, chest rising heavy, but on his feet. Layla shouted in joy at the sight. One boy asked his friends if he heard right. Had the melee division actually won for the first time in years? A student with glasses muttered that maybe Noel had just drained his mana with too many summons. Speculation rippled through the crowd, theories piling up on how it ended. But Silas broke through the noise, stating flatly that Noel hadn't lost because of a mistake. He lost because Setsuna was simply stronger. A student nearby admitted the fight with the melee magic representative had turned out far more interesting than expected, but argued safeguards should have been enforced. The second round began, clashing hard from the start. After watching, Setsuna walked over to Layla. She praised his performance and asked if he planned to stay for the next match. He said he would, noting it would help him prepare for what was coming. He knew the second fight put summon magic against formation magic. The host announced Carol, the summon magic representative, had the advantage, while the formation magic student struggled to close the gap. Setsuna watched closely, thinking that even if the formation user was losing, his techniques were sharp and worth studying against melee. Layla remarked that the spells looked flashy, but she still wanted to grow through melee magic. Setsuna asked why she had chosen it, when she could have had potential in other paths. Layla explained, recalling a memory from childhood. She had been playing with her younger brother when a bear attacked them. They had no chance until a melee mage appeared and saved them. That image of strength stuck with her. From then on, she decided she wanted to be like that mage, strong enough to protect others. She admitted it sounded childish and felt embarrassed. Setsuna said it wasn't childish. A goal gave people limitless drive to grow stronger. Layla asked if he really believed that, and he nodded. At that moment, Leo approached. Setsuna recognized him as the sharpest in the ranged magic division, second only to himself. Leo gave credit to Setsuna for his win, admitting that for someone from melee magic, his power was striking. He then turned his eyes to the girl next to Setsuna and asked who she was. Leo hesitated, words hanging, and asked if they understood each other. Setsuna was caught off guard by the question. Layla quickly cut in, insisting it wasn't what he thought, then stood and walked away. As she left, she wondered aloud if Leo was Setsuna's friend, and suggested they should sit together to watch the rest of the matches. Setsuna kept thinking about Layla's strange reaction. Leo sat beside him, and Setsuna asked why Akhtar had become the ranged magic representative instead of him. Setsuna admitted his surprise since Leo's skills were obvious. Leo's tone dropped, carrying a hint of regret. He explained that Akhtar was sly and had manipulated him into stepping down so he could take the role. He warned Setsuna not to underestimate Akhtar, because he would use any means to get what he wanted. Setsuna understood the type and knew he would have to stay sharp. Elsewhere, Akhtar stared at a box of flowers, a twisted smile on his face. When the tournament resumed, the host declared the first match of the second round, ranged magic against melee magic. The stage was set so that any fighter who fell would not only lose but also suffer from a punishing scoring system. Drago, seated next to Lionel, muttered that even reaching Akhtar would be a challenge. Lionel agreed, noting the disadvantage. Akhtar sat with Silas, remarking on how perfect the stage was. Silas, proud as head of the ranged magic department, claimed Setsuna would be forced to regret his choice of melee. Akhtar smirked, saying regret was only possible if Setsuna even made it to the fight. The host called out that the match was about to begin, but Setsuna hadn't shown up. If he didn't appear within 5 minutes, ranged magic would win by default. Lionel and Drago were stunned. The scene shifted to 10 minutes earlier in the waiting room. Layla had knocked and entered, asking how Setsuna felt. He told her he was fine, then pointed to a vase nearby. He explained it was a magic tool that activated on touch, draining a huge amount of mana from anyone who handled it. She was shocked, wondering why something so dangerous was there. He said it was planted to cripple him before the match, another assassination attempt, the 7th so far. When she asked if he had been harmed, he told her not to worry. He had already dealt with it. Setsuna recognized Akhtar's hand in this, precise and careful, leaving no sign that could trace back to him. A knock echoed at the door, and 3 children stepped in carrying a bouquet, asking Layla to pass it to Setsuna. She questioned why children were even there. One boy explained that a man had sent them to deliver it. When they looked around, no one else was present. Layla thought it strange, believing Setsuna should have received it directly. The boy added that the man had been insistent. As one of the children holding the bouquet grew dizzy and collapsed, Setsuna caught sight of dark marks on her neck, marks he had seen during the war. He kicked the bouquet away at once. Alarm spread across Layla's face as she asked what was wrong. Setsuna explained the flowers were venium, a lethal plant. The children's condition worsened, and fury built in him. He muttered in anger at how far people would go to twist lives and use innocence as tools. He knew if they weren't treated immediately, they wouldn't make it, but only a healing mage could truly diagnose and cure the poison. Layla, just as shaken, said their lives were slipping away. She rushed out orders telling him to keep his distance too, since the poison could spread with contact. She insisted she would be fine and pulled out a brooch, asking him to trust her. Setsuna realized it was a mana vessel. Layla explained her mother had stored healing spells inside for emergencies. She activated it, releasing healing energy, and the marks on the children began to fade. She admitted her mother had never imagined the artifact being used in such a way. Setsuna gave a sharp nod, thankful, then pushed the poisoned bouquet farther away, swearing he would handle the rest. He knew Venium released its deadliest toxins when blooming, and it had to be destroyed before it spread further. But if he tried to burn it here, the poison would drift across the arena. Already feeling its effect crawling into his body, he hurled the bouquet toward the world tree. With a surge of mana, he cut through it, launching the toxic flowers high into the air and away from the crowd. Flames consumed it, and as the smoke rose, the poison thinned, letting his strength return. Meanwhile, in the arena, the audience whispered about Setsuna's absence. Some speculated he had run away in fear. The host, checking the time, announced that Setsuna would be disqualified. The host was about to declare Akhtar the winner when Setsuna appeared, cutting him off and making it clear the fight wasn't finished. Akhtar greeted his arrival with a twisted smile, claiming the gift he had arranged to celebrate Setsuna's first victory had suited him perfectly. Setsuna called him out for relying on cheap tricks, poisoning him, and dragging innocent children into the scheme. Akhtar pretended not to understand, brushing it off, saying there was nothing serious about it, and that the children would be proud to have helped secure his win. The words only sharpened Setsuna's fury. The host gave the signal for the match to begin. Akhtar struck first, launching star-twisted magic across the arena, but Setsuna evaded each blast with quick movements. Drago, watching from the edge, suspected something had happened before the fight because Setsuna's mana flow looked unstable. Setsuna himself understood. The World Tree had purged most of the poison from his body, but enough remained to slow him down. Wave after wave of attacks rained down, forcing Setsuna to leap and dodge without pause. Akhtar mocked him with every step, claiming the melee magic representative was only good for defending. Silas, hidden among the crowd, muttered that his preparations had worked. Even if Setsuna gave his all, this fight was locked against him. Setsuna scanned the stands and realized Layla wasn't back yet. He wondered if the poisoned children had pulled through. Akhtar caught his distraction and jeered, saying he looked tired and unfocused. From the stands, voices rose. One boy sneering that running was all melee fighters knew. Another doubting Setsuna could ever stand against ranged magic. Akhtar unleashed another strike, this time promising the finish. Setsuna planted his feet, determined to block it with his mana guard, but when he raised it, the defense shattered instantly, and the force tore into him, leaving his body wrecked. Akhtar laughed, pointing to his battered form, calling it pathetic. Setsuna dragged himself upright, bloodied but steady, and demanded to know why Akhtar had stopped pressing him. He asked when the range department had ever shown weakness, why Akhtar wasn't driving him into the ground instead of wasting time. Even through pain, Setsuna studied his opponent, piecing together his intent. Akhtar smirked, realizing Setsuna was still dissecting every move, even as he fought to stay alive. Akhtar found Setsuna intriguing and forced him to take in his surroundings. Setsuna realized he was cornered, standing on a narrow stretch of land with molten lava cutting off every escape. From the stands, a boy shouted that he was completely trapped. Akhtar declared his pursuit of perfection and claimed Setsuna had moved exactly as he planned. With his storm cannon prepared, he announced the end. At that moment, Layla entered the arena and shouted that the children were safe. Relief crossed Setsuna's face. He smiled, finally able to fight without restraint. His preparations were complete. A sudden surge of mana poured from him, leaving Akhtar stunned. He couldn't understand how Setsuna had gathered so much energy. Setsuna revealed that he had been using physical boosts to stimulate his cells, purging the poison from his blood while Akhtar wasted time showing off. He said Akhtar had only dug his own grave. Furious, Akhtar lashed back that Setsuna's body was still in ruins. Silas, watching closely, urged Akhtar to end it, claiming Setsuna was bluffing. Akhtar unleashed his attack, but Setsuna knew he had almost no mana left. He was down to one strike. Gathering the last of his strength, he cut through the storm cannon with his blade. The sudden counter shocked both Drago and Akhtar. The redirected blast shot back toward Akhtar, who quickly nullified it, mocking the idea that he would just stand still and take the hit. He claimed it was Setsuna who would bury himself today. But by the time he looked again, Setsuna had already closed the gap, blade drawn. Setsuna smirked, declaring that Akhtar had underestimated him. Fear replaced confidence in Akhtar's eyes. He begged for mercy, stammering apologies, but Setsuna struck him hard with his sword, knocking him flat. Coldly, Setsuna said the apologies belonged to the children, not him. The host announced Setsuna as the winner. Cheers began to rise, but the ground beneath them shifted, sliding apart. Both fighters were thrown off balance, teetering on the edge. Gasps erupted from the crowd. As they fell, Setsuna noticed Akhtar was already unconscious and at risk of being lost completely. Forcing his body into control, Setsuna stabilized himself and caught Akhtar before he dropped any farther. For a moment, he wondered if he had been too late. At that moment, Carol appeared, summoning Fenrir to pull them out of danger. Setsuna immediately recognized the magic as hers. The crowd erupted as the beast swept in and hauled both of them to safety. Carol praised her summon and turned toward Setsuna with a smile, hoping he wouldn't object to her interference. Setsuna thanked her silently, knowing Carol stood out as a clear favorite to win the Entrain Roll contest. She was dangerous, and he understood he would have to prepare carefully for their clash. The audience remained stunned by the outcome. A boy insisted it couldn't have been just luck, while a girl whispered that no one could have predicted it. From the stands, the headmaster observed in silence. Silas, furious at Akhtar, spat out his contempt, swearing Setsuna would regret surviving. Setsuna rejoined Layla, Drago, and Lionel. Layla expressed her gratitude, while Drago, having heard what had happened, acknowledged his effort as well. Setsuna asked about the children, and Layla reassured him they were safe in the infirmary, and would recover soon. Relief washed over him. He had been worried far more than he wanted to admit. Then a strange sensation struck him, a pulse of killing intent that disappeared as quickly as it came. He turned sharply, scanning, while Layla questioned him. He brushed it off, though his thoughts stayed fixed on the brief flare of bloodlust. Something at the academy wasn't right. That night he stood near the rocks in the forest, counting the days. Only 1 week remained before the final match. He remembered the twisted energy he had felt during the tournament and told himself he had to push even further. Lionel arrived, questioning why Setsuna had chosen such an isolated spot to meet. Setsuna revealed that he wanted to learn a certain spell, Lionel's Comet Fist. Lionel let out a short laugh, admitting that people once called him that, and asked how Setsuna had heard the name. Setsuna's hands tightened into fists. He had first heard it in the Maze army, before his return to the past. The Comet Fist was the name of a melee mage who once felled a dragon with a single strike. By the time Setsuna entered the army, that mage had already vanished. Now it was no longer a guess. Setsuna was convinced the head of his department was the same man. He straightened, determination carved into his stance, and lowered his head toward Lionel, ready to claim the forbidden magic for himself. Lionel explained that the Comet Fist was an ancient technique. Setsuna said it didn't matter. To him, Lionel was the strongest melee mage he had ever seen. Lionel asked why he was so desperate for power when he already seemed capable enough. Setsuna answered that it wasn't enough. He swore never to lose again, not even against an invincible opponent. Lionel laughed, calling him interesting, and agreed to teach him, but warned that the technique wasn't something any student should attempt so soon. He began drawing mana into his hand, the pressure so strong Setsuna felt it from where he stood. Lionel told him this was the Comet Fist. He had only used it twice, as the cost in mana was enormous, but one strike was all it took. He told Setsuna to pay close attention. With one punch into the ground, Lionel released a blast so heavy that the entire area shattered, debris tearing into the air. Setsuna stared, stunned. It was far beyond what he had imagined. Lionel explained that the technique required compressing huge amounts of mana into a single point, which made it hard to use in direct one-on-one battles like tournaments. He asked Setsuna if he still wanted it. Setsuna answered without hesitation that he did. Lionel agreed to begin and told him to follow. The scene shifted. Carol was drinking tea with a man who congratulated her for reaching the final. She thanked him, and he asked if she was sure she could defeat the melee representative. Carol smiled, brushing off his words, saying the outcome was uncertain, though she intended to give everything. As he drained his cup, she rose to refill it. In that instant, the man slipped out a card, activating it against her. An emblem flared on the back of her neck and she collapsed. He smirked, thinking it would be perfect if Carol eliminated Setsuna, but if not, he would remove them both. Meanwhile, Setsuna trained relentlessly, questioning if he was prepared. Lionel was stunned when he saw the results. Setsuna had mastered in 1 week what should have taken years. Accepting the proof, Lionel declared he had passed, ending the lessons of the Comet Fist, also known as the Charge Bullet. The day of the final match arrived and the arena was filled with spectators. The host declared the start of the Elm Ridge Mage Academy's 781st Intramural Contest Final. The first fighter was Carol, coming in with consecutive wins for the Summoning Magic Department. Her opponent was Setsuna from the Melee Magic Department, the one who had turned the entire contest upside down that year. The students argued over the outcome. A boy was sure Carol would win, pointing out her dominance in every fight so far. A girl countered, insisting that Setsuna was strong as well, and after watching his last fight, she was openly cheering for him. 3 children in the stands shouted for Setsuna, their voices cutting through the crowd. The chosen stage was the goddess's ruins. Expecting chaos, a formation mage reinforced the battlefield with a powerful barrier. Layla, standing with Lionel, said the conditions looked fair. Lionel kept his own doubts quiet, while Setsuna glanced at the headmaster, reminding himself of the promise made to grant him a second specialization. Carol believed Setsuna had prepared thoroughly, but she was ready to summon Fenrir and force him to fight with everything he had. The host called for the match to begin. Fenrir appeared at her side, and she mounted the beast, driving it straight at Setsuna. He slipped past the first charge, eyeing the attack and wondering if it carried a glacial bomb mixed with snow flurries. Carol pressed harder, sure his defenses would break sooner or later, confident he would regret trying to endure her pace. Fenrir struck again, but Setsuna activated his physical amplifier, multiplying his speed tenfold. With that burst, he dodged cleanly and pushed close enough to aim a slash at Fenrir. Layla's relief was clear, but Lionel stayed cold, noting that familiars were nothing but masses of mana. Injuries wouldn't last. Carol admitted his effort wasn't bad, but ordered Fenrir to release its real strength. The ground began to freeze over, ice spreading across the ruins. Setsuna froze in shock for a moment, realizing the cold wasn't reaching beyond the barrier but inside. Fenrir's strength was climbing fast. A man on the sidelines stood over the frozen floor, muttering that Fenrir's attacks would now hit even harder. His eyes locked on Setsuna, waiting for his next move. Setsuna knew that regular strikes wouldn't matter. The longer the fight stretched, the more the tide would turn against him. He shifted to using the broken ruins as platforms, jumping across them, preparing himself to gamble on the charged bullets. Setsuna shaped a blade from his mana and braced himself as Fenrir's strikes hammered the stone beneath him. From the stands, one boy guessed he wasn't attacking at all, only defending. Another muttered that Setsuna was no match for a summoning mage. The three children cheering him earlier now looked uneasy, worried he might lose. Lionel studied the clash while Layla pressed him about what was wrong. He said nothing but knew the truth. The charged bullet could only be fired once, after enough mana was compressed, making it a hard move to rely on in a one-on-one fight. Still, Setsuna's control was razor sharp, and he was slowly channeling everything into his fist. The effort wasn't easy. Carol on the other side admitted she had no idea what Setsuna was hiding, but she wasn't going to wait to find out. She called out Garuda, a bird familiar, to fight alongside Fenrir. Dravo's eyes widened. 2 summons at once. Lionel muttered that her skill was undeniable. Both beasts lunged at Setsuna together. Layla's face tightened with worry, but Setsuna met the assault with both arms, forcing them back. Calmly, he acknowledged that he had expected her trump card. Carol froze, shocked that he had stopped her attack at all. She couldn't understand how. Before Setsuna could push forward, his gaze caught a strange man at the edge of the arena. The man snapped his fingers, and Carol flinched as a black aura wrapped around her. Setsuna tensed, wondering if this was the death god's magic. Layla was sure it was, though the thought made no sense. Carol's voice broke into rambling, then twisted into a scream. Dark energy burst from her, and shadow creatures spilled into the arena, clawing toward Setsuna. The crowd recoiled, confused at how many familiars she could possibly summon. Lionel's face hardened. This wasn't her magic. He demanded the match be stopped, shouting at the formation mage to drop the barrier. But the villain laughed, saying only the caster could remove it, and the formation mage was already in his grip. Setsuna fought against the creatures, realizing the one behind it all had to be nearby. He activated mana detection to lock onto the source. The man sneered, telling him to worry about the fight instead. He ordered Garuda forward, its strike sending Setsuna crashing back. Layla's heart pounded as she watched him struggle to rise. The man mocked that Setsuna would never find him hidden in the crowd, and in his weakened state he could do nothing. Lionel felt the urgency building. Setsuna had no time left to prepare another charged bullet, and Carol's body was breaking down fast. If they stalled any longer, she would lose control of her magic and her life would be at risk. He knew someone was pulling the strings from the shadows. Carol still struggled, begging Setsuna to escape as the dark creatures pressed closer. He ignored the warning, weaving past her attacks and cutting down monsters on his way toward her. A horned beast lunged at him, but Setsuna seized its horns and slammed it against the others. The headmaster kept watching while Lionel rushed up the stairs, cursing the pace. At this rate, Setsuna would be crushed. The only way out was to locate the formation mage who had locked the barrier, and Lionel could only hope Setsuna survived long enough. Another beast, long and sharp-horned, charged straight at Setsuna and pierced his leg. Layla gasped, her face tight with fear, and the students around her broke into nervous chatter. The man behind the dark magic smirked and called the fight finished, sending the familiars forward to tear him apart. They swarmed. Fenrir clamped its jaws on Setsuna's hand, tearing into him and driving a scream from his throat that echoed across the arena. In the agony, Setsuna remembered Lionel's lesson. He had asked the students what mattered most in melee magic. Drago had said it was striking the enemy down in one blow. Setsuna had added that it was about closing the gap while taking as little damage as possible. Lionel had ended it with the core truth. Never let an attack break your focus. Stand firm, endure, and land the final strike. He had ordered them to start training against damage that day. The memory snapped Setsuna back. His defense had held. The man watching frowned. believing Setsuna's arm destroyed, then wondered if the boy had done it on purpose to pour mana into one strike. Setsuna knew the familiars were at their peak frenzy. One slip and they would tear him apart like prey. He roared that it would end in one punch, then unleashed the charged bullet. The blast tore through, erasing all the familiars in a single strike. When it was over, Carol staggered and nearly collapsed. Setsuna rushed to her, checked that she was alive, then eased her down gently. The crowd stared in disbelief, whispering whether she had truly fallen. The host declared Setsuna the winner, the first melee mage in a century to claim the title. The arena erupted in cheers. Some students whispered about the last techniques he had used, moves none of them had ever seen before. Layla and Dreva were glowing with joy at the result. The boy Setsuna had once saved, the same one who had lost to him earlier, said he had expected this and admitted he had even placed his bet on Setsuna. His friend asked how much he had earned. The answer was that he hadn't thought Setsuna would actually win, but he couldn't stand by without acting. He added that the formation mage had to be dealt with. The man then sensed something off, muttering about someone praising the formation mage, and marked a symbol across the mage's back with hidden magic. Lionel, following the strange presence, reached the area and found the formation mage lying on the ground. Something had already happened, though he couldn't tell what. Moments later, the barrier around the arena broke apart. The headmaster stepped down to the stage, stating that Carol had collapsed simply because she had forced too many familiars at once. Setsuna wasn't convinced. He felt certain someone had been controlling her. The headmaster examined Carol closely and concluded that a magical artifact had been used. He told the crowd to leave the matter to him. While he worked to stabilize her, he turned to Setsuna, acknowledged his strength, and confirmed he would honor his promise. Setsuna accepted the words. Before leaving, the headmaster instructed Setsuna to meet him in his office the next day. Afterward, Setsuna went to the infirmary where a healer patched his wounds. She warned that his injuries weren't fully healed and told him to rest. He thanked her, changed into new clothes, and just as he finished, a knock came at the door. Lionel entered with Drago, Layla, and the 3 children. Layla immediately asked about his condition. Setsuna flexed his hand to show he was fine. Relief washed over her face as she congratulated him again. Drago followed with his own words, proud and smiling, calling Setsuna the pride of the melee department. The children bounced with excitement, saying they loved watching him fight and thought he was incredible. After the exchange, they all left, leaving Lionel alone with Setsuna. Lionel reported that the formation mage had stabilized and regained consciousness. He added that Carol's condition was poor, though she was no longer in immediate danger. Once she recovered, they could uncover more about what had truly happened. What mattered most now was clear. Someone had targeted Setsuna during the match. Lionel pressed him to consider who might be responsible. Night fell. A figure cloaked in shadow approached a quiet room, testing the door only to find a barrier woven against intruders. It made no difference. With a single surge of power, the ward cracked apart and dissolved. The intruder stepped inside. Carol lay unconscious on the bed. The figure muttered that she would have to be erased before Setsuna. Anyone who knew the truth couldn't be left alive. He released an attack meant to end her life, only for a blade to cut it down in midair. Setsuna stood before her, eyes burning with grim resolve. He had expected the culprit to come, though he had hoped it wouldn't turn out to be Leo. Leo admitted that Setsuna had finally pieced things together, though he noted Setsuna had no proof until now. He said he had suspected the truth as well, only becoming certain in that moment. Suggesting they take it outside, he turned toward the night. Setsuna followed, aware that his body was not fully healed. Fighting in his state would be reckless, maybe fatal. Leo told him to drop the frown, and asked when suspicion had first taken root. Setsuna recalled the ritual of the choice, the moment Leo had suddenly vanished without reason. That absence was too strange. It was just as suspicious that Leo had not been picked as the ranged magic representative. No trick Akhtar used would have fooled him so easily. Leo admitted he should have been chosen instead. Setsuna pressed on. When he had seen Leo again that night, the doubt became certainty. Just as during the intramural final, he had sensed it, the power of the death god pulsing inside Leo. Leo said little, only stepping closer, his body flaring with shifting, unnatural auras. Red streaks burned across Leo's face as he pressed Setsuna on what he knew of the death god. Setsuna read the magic instantly and felt the shift in Leo's presence. The truth hit him. Leo was no ordinary enemy but a servant of the death god. If that was true, then stopping him was the only option. Leo mocked their broken bond, calling for an end to their so-called friendship. He wanted entertainment, even if it meant pain for Setsuna. Setsuna charged with a sword formed of mana, but Leo cut it in half with ease. The clash felt like a memory replaying itself. Leo boasted of the death god's trust, explaining that he had been given the power of disintegration, one ability among many. No spell Setsuna cast would ever reach him. Setsuna attacked again, only to be countered just as easily. But surrender wasn't an option. He noticed Leo only used disintegration when struck at directly, vanishing with speed that left him open for counterstrikes. Setsuna tried to flank him from behind, but again his blade was stopped. Leo sneered, claiming his perception outmatched Setsuna's every move. Injured but resolute, Setsuna conjured a fireball, muttering that the fight would have been easier if he weren't already wounded. The pain burned through him, but he forced his body steady. Leo admitted that Setsuna was still a troublesome opponent, surviving this long with nothing but grit. He said Setsuna might have been even stronger if he had been chosen by the ranged magic department, then laughed strangely, as though the choice had been his to make. Declaring the fight should end, he unleashed a crack of electricity, driving a spike into Setsuna's leg. Agony tore through him. The old wound from the final match had never closed, and it split open again under the strike. Setsuna clenched his teeth and demanded to know why Leo was doing this. Leo answered with cold indifference. No reason at all, only boredom. Like toppling a castle built by someone else. Setsuna's thoughts twisted with anger. Leo had slaughtered and ruined lives for nothing, for whims. He shouted at him, questioning if the one before him was even the Leo he once knew. Leo snapped back, telling him to be silent, and prepared another attack. Setsuna knew his mana blade alone wouldn't be enough. To win, he needed a strike so powerful that even Leo's disintegration couldn't erase it. His mind reached back to the battle against Discord, reminding him of one truth. He couldn't stop here, not yet. Setsuna readied his strike, but Leo smirked, declaring it was already too late. Leo unleashed his attack, and Setsuna felt the death god's power tear through the air at blinding speed. A lightning bolt cut across and intercepted the strike, followed by another that crashed into Leo. He blocked, shaken, but not broken. Setsuna glanced upward to the roofline and spotted the headmaster, his dragon looming beside him. The headmaster judged the scene, questioning if he had arrived too late. Setsuna knew the timing was perfect. Suspicion circled back. The contests, the impurity of mana, all tied to Leo. The headmaster's gut had been right. Leo noted the sharpness of the old man's perception, acknowledging why he ruled the school. The headmaster, though, had hoped not to find betrayal inside his own ranks. His frustration erupted, his voice hard as his dragon roared, unleashing a searing blaze. The strike should have ended the fight, but Leo stood untouched. He mocked the white dragon, strongest of all summoned beasts, claiming only the demon god's gift had spared him from annihilation. The headmaster's eyes narrowed. He recognized it now. Disintegration magic, a power whispered about in old records of the Silverlock line. When the dark force stirred, the world faced ruin. Magic disintegration was one of its weapons. Leo boasted again, saying no magic could pierce him. To prove it, he drew on 3 different elements at once, weaving them together. Setsuna understood instantly. It was a triple attribute combination, and Leo blasted the field with a storm of energy. The headmaster's eyes flashed wide as he snapped an order. Setsuna shifted 2 steps right, and the strike grazed past him, leaving the ground in ruin. The headmaster dodged as well, moving through the chaos in ways Leo couldn't read. Leo's eyes narrowed, unsettled, questioning what kind of magic allowed the headmaster to slip through his attacks. The headmaster claimed only he knew how to strip that cursed magic bare. Leo sneered at the claim, lifting higher, promising to push even greater power and daring the headmaster to dodge again. Setsuna felt it building in the air. This wasn't just Leo's strength anymore. It was the death god's power bleeding through him. Leo threatened to erase them all. The headmaster sensed that this was no ordinary surge of power. At the pace Leo unleashed his spells, the entire area would be torn apart in the crossfire. He called on Setsuna, and the boy aligned with his plan. The headmaster summoned the holy butterfly, its wings unfurling as it carried him skyward alongside the dragon. Leo watched with a smirk, mocking the headmaster's desperate effort to shield everyone. He pointed at the white dragon, daring it to come. Both sides clashed. Leo's magic slammed into the dragon, detonating in a violent explosion. From within the smoke, Leo demanded to know if the headmaster was ready to accept defeat. The headmaster admitted it might be time for an old man to step aside. Setsuna burst from the haze, charging straight at Leo. Leo scoffed, mocking him for hiding behind the dragon to set up this strike. He threw up a barrier, declaring all of Setsuna's effort useless. Setsuna vowed that Leo would regret his arrogance. Melee magic had never been a mistake, and this strike would prove it. Leo warned of the demon god's power, but the blow still came. Setsuna drove all his energy into speed, ripped through the barrier, and smashed into Leo, igniting another massive blast. The headmaster noted that even disintegration magic had a limit. It couldn't counter faster than the strike itself. He saw Setsuna's resolve, and it impressed him. Leo crashed down, body broken. Setsuna realized his melee path had surpassed the rhythm of disintegration itself. He finally understood his choice had been right. He turned to the headmaster, saying the fight seemed over. The headmaster praised him, urging treatment for his wounds, but Leo rose again. Setsuna froze, stunned that his strike hadn't ended it. Though bleeding and battered, Leo stood tall, ready to attack once more. He gathered power, measured his moment, and hurled it straight at Setsuna. Setsuna raised his sword to block, but the blade shattered on impact. The force smashed into him, throwing him into a wall. His body slumped, cut and broken. As his vision dimmed and his strength bled away, he heard Leo's voice, mocking disbelief that Setsuna was still alive at all. Leo was a force too strong. Setsuna wondered if he had fused ranged magic with disintegration, but that should have been impossible. As his mind faded, old memories surfaced. Back when they trained at targets, Leo had made it look effortless. Setsuna had admitted Leo's natural skill, knowing that if he ever slacked off, Leo would have left him behind. Leo had laughed then, enjoying the praise from a prodigy. During the war, Leo had pointed his weapon and mused about aiming at Setsuna next. He told him to look back. Setsuna turned and saw allies bleeding out, torn apart by monsters. Leo's voice had cut deep, branding him unworthy of the hero's name, calling him a failure for not saving them all, for abandoning them. Those words echoed when Setsuna woke on a bed, body broken. Layla sat nearby, relief written on her face. She explained he had been carried to the infirmary and had been unconscious for 3 days. Setsuna felt the weight of failure again, powerless against the demon god's strength, just as in his past life. He asked after the headmaster. Layla said the old man was in his office holding a meeting with the other department heads. Setsuna pushed himself up. Layla tried to stop him, but he dressed quickly. He placed a hand on her shoulder, told her he was sorry for the worry, but he needed to see the headmaster now. Then he left the infirmary. The headmaster had just ended the meeting, thanking the gathered instructors before dismissing them. As they filed out, one muttered about the work ahead. Silas muttered that all of this had been worsened by a single boy. Setsuna stepped in through the open door. The headmaster smiled at the sight of him alive. Silas scowled, unimpressed. Lionel clapped Setsuna's shoulder, saying he had endured more than enough. They were all worried, but the details of what had happened could wait. When the others were gone, Setsuna faced the headmaster, weighed down by regret, blaming himself for all that had unfolded. He lifted his hand toward the old man, asking what happened after he blacked out. Pain stabbed through his body as he moved, and the headmaster reminded him his wounds were far from healed. The headmaster explained that after Setsuna collapsed, Leo admitted he wanted to finish the fight, but had already burned too much mana. He decided to withdraw, saying it would be more entertaining to face them again later. He opened a passage and vanished, leaving only a farewell for the headmaster, promising they would meet again if chance allowed. The headmaster thought to himself that even though it had been a golden chance to strike, whatever waited beyond that passage was too dangerous to pursue. A full confrontation would have to come another day. Setsuna sat down, lost in thought, bringing up the strange entity and the rift between dimensions, something the headmaster had also witnessed. The old man asked if Setsuna had any idea who it was and pressed further. How much did he actually know? Since Setsuna had even uncovered his secret magic, he wanted an explanation he could trust completely. Setsuna hesitated. Should he tell the truth now? Could he convince the headmaster that he came from the future? The headmaster pressed him, asking if there was a reason he couldn't speak. An idea struck. Setsuna told him to examine the amulet of resurgence. The headmaster, startled, studied it and recognized it as the blessing of the spirit of time, long gone from the world. If the amulet had already been used once, then time travel wasn't impossible. Setsuna admitted it outright. The headmaster had already pieced it together. He had come back from 10 years in the future after losing everything by using the amulet. He told him everything. The death god would destroy the world. The headmaster would die at his hands, cut down along with many others. The headmaster accepted the truth, saying it was hard to believe but undeniable with the amulet before him. The spirit's power had carried Setsuna through time, but the trauma of that future must have been unbearable to force him to leap back an entire decade. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, telling him he had carried a crushing burden alone long enough. From now on, he wouldn't have to fight it by himself. Setsuna felt relief flood through him, a weight lifted, and for the first time in years, a spark of hope. With the headmaster beside him, Setsuna felt there was still a chance to fight back, that the world might not sink into ruin. The headmaster said he would teach him a second form of magic to stand against the death god. This was not part of the standard branches of magic, but something else entirely. Elemental magic. He suggested they move to a better place for training. Their path led to the World Tree. The headmaster remarked it had been many years since he last came there, a place he used for his own training in his youth. That detail caught Setsuna off guard. At the base of the tree, the headmaster explained elemental magic in simple terms. By using mana to merge with elemental spirits, the caster could channel raw force through their body. Unlike the normal paths of magic, elemental magic started from a different point, but it could merge with other types, making it powerful and flexible. Setsuna doubted if such a thing was possible. The headmaster decided to show him. His eyes lit up, changing color, the same as during his fight with Leo. Instead of a duel, he proposed a game of rock, paper, scissors, pointing out that Setsuna's injuries kept him from fighting properly. They played. Setsuna lost every round. Again and again, the headmaster won. At last, he explained the truth. This was the ability of the spirit of time. Elemental magic had granted him foresight, letting him see moments ahead. He went on to say that many spirits existed, each granting unique powers. A contract with the spirit of wind meant flight, with water meant evasive movement, and so on. Setsuna was struck by the possibilities. If mastered, elemental magic could transform melee combat into something far greater. But the headmaster told him he couldn't practice any of it until he secured a contract with a spirit. The first step was to attempt contact. The headmaster cleared his mind, aligning himself with nature, showing how to sense the spirits woven into everything. He told Setsuna to do the same. Setsuna closed his eyes, focused, and tried to dissolve his thoughts until there was nothing left but the feel of the world around him. Setsuna fixed his attention on the spirits, begging for the strength to stand against the death god. Nothing answered. The silence of nature mocked him. He felt nothing at all. Frustration built. He couldn't sense even a single spirit. The headmaster noticed his struggle and said Setsuna's temperament was the obstacle. Setsuna didn't understand at first, but the old man explained that unity with nature required a trance-like state, an emptied mind open enough to feel the spirits drifting everywhere. Setsuna tried again, but focus slipped through his grip. Thoughts of failure dragged at him, thoughts of how badly he wanted power, how little progress he had made. The headmaster placed a hand on his shoulder and told him not to rush, reminding him it had taken 3 years before he himself felt nature's pulse. Setsuna pushed back. 3 years was impossible. The death god's return was 5 years away, and the apostles could appear at any time. There was no room for delay. The headmaster froze at that word, apostles. Setsuna explained that, like the death god, they came from another world, wielding strange powers outside the rules of magic. Leo was one of them. Memory cut sharp through Setsuna. In his old life, he had faced only one apostle, and even then, despite all his strength, victory came barely, and only with ranged magic. The headmaster considered this, recalling records from the Silverlock family that spoke of 12 apostles in total. Setsuna accepted that truth, knowing more like Leo lurked, waiting to tear their world apart. The headmaster told him not to let fear and urgency cloud his judgment. Panic could kill just as easily as any blade. He offered another path, joint training inside the dungeon. There, Setsuna could push his limits, sharpen his strength, and maybe feel the spirits in ways meditation alone could not. Lionel would explain everything. Rest first, he warned, because it would not be easy. Far away, Leo stepped into a dim hall that resembled a ruined castle. Shadows clung to the walls. He apologized for his delay and moved forward. Zagan, the 10th apostle, mocked Leo's nerve, questioning if he was still chained to his old habits. Puka, the 9th, crawled across the ceiling like a spider, amused as he recalled rumors that Leo had picked a fight with the wrong student. He wondered how Leo managed to stir up so much chaos, especially after Bagachi had fled following his defeat. Puka pressed further, asking how Leo planned to clean up the mess he had left behind. Leo, the 12th apostle, offered a half-hearted apology, claiming he had simply gotten carried away while enjoying time with an old friend. Zagan's patience snapped. The grin on Leo's face fueled his anger, and as their eyes locked, he prepared to strike. Before the clash could begin, a voice from the distance cut through, condemning such reckless behavior. Apostles should not waste energy on petty fights that only risked interfering with their god's designs. The one speaking was Sadanaksha, the second apostle. His presence pressed down on them like a weight, forcing both to stillness as he asked if they had more to add. Zagan backed down, though not without pointing at Leo, demanding whether Sadanaksha would punish a boy who failed to finish what he had started. He even offered to kill the boy himself. Puka, entertained by the idea, claimed assassination would be better left to him, promising it would be a spectacle worth watching. Sadanaksha dismissed them both, stating it was unnecessary. The matter was already being handled, and the one he had chosen would see it finished. Days after the intermedial contest, the scene shifted back to the academy. Setsuna sat among the other students in class. Layla checked on him, questioning if he was truly ready to be there. He assured her that listening required little effort, even with his lingering injuries. She pointed out that the final match had ended only days earlier, yet he had managed to hurt himself again. Her words brought back his memory of the headmaster's warning, announcing the existence of the death god and his apostles would be reckless. For now, only a handful of instructors would be entrusted with the truth. Their role would be to guard the academy and track Leo. The headmaster had also decided that Setsuna's elemental training would be postponed. Setsuna caught himself apologizing to Layla for asking her to prepare remedies, but insisted he was fine. What mattered was recovery. His clenched fists promised he would heal quickly and return to training. Layla sat beside him, and Lionel stepped forward to begin the lesson. With all students present, he introduced the next step, the interdepartmental joint training. Unlike the intramural contest, which showcased different combat styles, this training would throw students into teams across departments, forcing them to combine their strengths and refine their own abilities. Setsuna quickly understood. This wasn't just about power, but about building cooperation among the departments. Lionel turned their attention to the projector, revealing the image of a one-star underground dungeon. He explained it was a replica of what they might face in reality. Because of the risk, participation would be voluntary. The training would begin in a week, and until then, they were advised to conserve their energy. Setsuna thought about the joint training the headmaster had mentioned. If he wanted to stand in that arena again, he had to recover and be at full strength. That evening, after class ended, he walked alongside Layla. She reminded him that food was fuel and that he needed to eat more to regain strength for the training ahead. He wondered what they should have. Students around them whispered. They recognized him as the intramural contest winner, the melee mage who had shocked them all. A girl, face red, admitted to a friend that she had liked him since the final match. Layla noted that everyone seemed interested in him now, even though not long ago those same voices had called him a failure. As they moved through the crowd, 3 boys blocked their path, one with yellow hair, the others red. The blonde one pointed at Setsuna, congratulating him for the victory. Setsuna asked who he was, and the red-haired boy introduced him as Carl, the leader of a noble salon. They had heard that Setsuna would head straight into the mage army after graduation, so Carl extended an invitation to join his salon. Setsuna wondered what that even meant. Carl explained it was a social circle for nobles, not melee mages, but he would make an exception. Having the contest winner in the group would raise its standing. Girls nearby grew excited at the idea of him joining. Carl smirked, warning that someone like him should choose his company carefully. He gestured at Layla, saying that being seen with a commoner would damage his reputation. Setsuna turned him down without hesitation. Shock spread across the boys' faces. He turned away, questioning why background mattered so much. He told Layla they should leave. Carl's pride cracked. His anger boiled over, and one of his lackeys whispered that insulting the contest winner wasn't wise. Carl ignored him, pulling out a chain, fury in his eyes. He demanded to know how Setsuna dared to shame nobles. A blade hidden in the chain flashed as they prepared to strike. Setsuna shifted calmly, but Layla stepped forward first. She stopped Carl, reminding him that duels without approval violated academy rules. If anyone was crossing the line, it was him. Carl froze, his teeth grinding. He glared at her, enraged that a commoner would block his hand. The two red-haired boys hesitated, unsure whether to back him. Carl finally pulled back, swearing that his father would hear about this. The three stormed off, leaving the hall tense. Layla smiled at Setsuna, and he noted quietly that she was growing stronger too. Before he could dwell on it, another voice called his name. He turned, half annoyed at who it might be this time. Carol stood there, waving lightly. Relief touched him at the sight. She looked better. She told him it was thanks to him, and that she wanted to thank him properly. Her face flushed as she asked him to come to her room. Layla tried to make sense of what was happening. The scene shifted to Carol's room. She welcomed Setsuna, Drago, and Layla, explaining she was preparing a meal to thank them for saving her life, though it would take some time to finish. Setsuna, still uneasy, insisted it wasn't necessary. Carol dismissed his concern and told him to wait. Layla offered to help, noting that cooking alone would be too much work. Carol accepted. Even so, Layla couldn't stop thinking Carol had meant to invite only Setsuna, and her mind drifted toward less innocent possibilities. Drago, clearly puzzled, asked why he was there at all. Carol simply said the more the better. In the kitchen, Layla remarked she had never seen anything like the ingredients Carol used. She didn't even know food could aid recovery. Carol explained they were recovery foods. Meanwhile, Setsuna glanced around the room, remembering the headmaster's words. Carol had no memory of Leo. It could have been shock-induced amnesia, or maybe Leo had tampered with her mind. Though grateful she had survived, Setsuna couldn't shake the thought that someone might target her again. Drago noticed Setsuna's heavy expression, pointing out that he often took things too seriously and should loosen up. Setsuna considered his words, but a sudden loud crash erupted from the kitchen, sharp as an explosion. His nerves spiked, wondering if Carol and Layla were training instead of cooking. Drago looked equally startled. Carol then called Drago for help. When he stepped inside, she handed him a tight apron. He hesitated, realizing it was clearly designed for maids. Carol, unfazed, explained it was the only one available. Together, they kept cooking until the meal was ready. As Setsuna prepared to eat, Layla mentioned they had gone overboard and made far too much. Setsuna smiled faintly, deciding that since they had worked so hard, he would finish everything. He ate quickly, reasoning that boosting his body with proper food would let him handle as much as he wanted without falling ill. Layla approached, worried he was forcing himself, but he brushed it off. Curious, he asked who had made the egg soup, impressed by its umami taste. Drago grinned, claiming credit and urging him to eat more since plenty remained. Setsuna asked for another bowl, confirming his approval. Carol froze, stunned that her cooking had lost out to Drago's. They continued eating together, and Setsuna thought about how moments like this mattered. It reminded him of days before he had traveled back in time, when he and his friends spent their lives together in peace. Vidrak had stolen that life once, but Setsuna swore he would never let it be taken again. He refused to ever lose to Vidrak or anyone else again. 2 weeks later, the day of the dungeon joint training arrived. A crowd of students stood before the dungeon gate, buzzing with chatter. Setsuna and Drago were among them. Drago noted that Setsuna looked healthier than before. Setsuna admitted he felt strong, much better, thanks to the recovery food Drago had prepared, and he was grateful for it. Drago shrugged it off, saying it was the least he could do for a friend, adding that recovery food only worked if eaten regularly. Setsuna thought the dungeon would be simple with Drago and his team backing him. He trusted them completely. A boy and girl approached. The boy asked if Setsuna and Drago had been on the team long. Drago recognized them as the seniors. The boy introduced himself as Myfun, third year from Formation Magic, and said they would be on the same team. The girl pulled back her hood, revealing herself as Yuzuha, and said she looked forward to working with them. Drago introduced himself from Melee Magic, and Setsuna gave his name. Myfun clapped both on the shoulder, asking if Setsuna was the contest winner. Hearing confirmation, he said they were in good hands and that he was counting on them. As he walked on, Drago muttered that Myfun seemed far more fired up than expected. Yuzuha added that it was good to put juniors at ease. Myfun only grinned, saying they shouldn't expect him to go easy from now on. At that moment, the instructor called the group to order. Giovanni, head of Formation Magic, announced that all students had arrived and the interdepartmental training would begin. He explained that the Formation and Melee departments would be working together today in the Demonic Ruins, a 1-star dungeon crawling with ancient monsters and undercreatures. The students would need to cooperate to bring them down. He raised a bracelet for them to see, explaining that every action would be logged. Each monster defeated or treasure collected would earn points. The team with the highest score would receive an academy medal. Any individual with more than 100 points would qualify for Royal Mage Army field training. The name pulled at Setsuna's memory, an army of the kingdom's strongest mages, comrades he had once fought beside. If he earned that chance, he could see them again. Giovanni handed out the bracelets, warning them not to stray into areas beyond their level. Stronger monsters waited deeper inside, and those fights would be suicide. He gave one last warning: avoid the lowest level of the dungeon at all costs. In an emergency, they were to channel mana into the bracelet, which would trigger a teleportation spell and pull them out. Setsuna had already set his sights on 100 points, but then paused. Both he and Drago, almost at the same moment, raised the target to 200. Their eyes met, and Drago insisted that today was the day to try. Setsuna admitted he was right. Giovanni asked if the students were ready, and the group moved forward into the dungeon. Setsuna and Drago pushed ahead the moment the training began. Running side by side, Setsuna noted they had entered the demonic ruins, a one-star dungeon built by an ancient civilization, filled with traps and treasure chests left untouched. The monsters inside would attack on sight. Even with teleportation magic as a safety measure, he knew this training would not be easy. Drago pointed forward as a new path opened. Both were stunned by the sight of a vast underground castle-like structure. The scale of the space was overwhelming. Setsuna touched the surface of a wall, wondering if it was part of some ancient plant. An entire ecosystem seemed to thrive inside the ruins. He recalled the headmaster's words, that the training would be a chance to connect with nature and gain valuable insight into elemental magic. He intended to seize that chance. Other students caught up. Mifune grumbled about the rush. Yuzuha pointed out something ahead, and chatter spread among the group. A few rushed down one of the paths, ignoring warnings that the other ways were filled with traps. Mifune called them fools. The point of this training was to take the harder route, and he gestured toward another path, saying that was where they should go. Setsuna thought he wasn't wrong, since the goal was to rack up points. When Mifune asked if Setsuna was following, Setsuna, uneasy, examined a wall. He noticed the plants growing. They were at a different stage compared to the rest, a sign of another space beyond. Drago asked what he found. Setsuna explained that he could even hear wind leaking from inside. Before he could say more, Drago smashed the wall open. Setsuna stared at the new path and urged they head that way. He and Drago rushed forward while Mifune admitted their observation was sharp, worth a heavy amount of points if luck was on their side. As they climbed a staircase, a massive stone ball rolled down at them. Setsuna drew his sword and shattered it, fragments scattering down and forcing Drago and Mifune to dodge. Setsuna glanced at Drago, questioning if he was ready. Drago clenched his fists, fired up to prove his strength. He wanted to show everyone the real power of melee magic and wasn't about to let Setsuna outshine him. Suddenly a flash. Arrows shot from hidden slots. Mifune twisted clear, then destroyed the source of the attack. Drago noted Setsuna's speed, always one step ahead. He said clearing the traps would leave a clean path for the seniors behind them. Then a chest came into sight. Before Setsuna or Drago reacted, Mifune used magic to snap it open. He claimed the contents and logged 15 points, thanking Drago for the assist. Drago was stunned when he realized whoever opened the chest kept the treasure. He swore Mifune wouldn't steal the next one. Setsuna and Drago pushed ahead, but Drago sensed something odd along a wall. He smashed it open, exposing another chest. Before he could touch it, Mifune's magic snatched it away, raising his score to 30, while Drago stayed at 0. They pressed on until Drago came across a night-stalking obstacle. He tore at it, cutting off limbs piece by piece, but Mifune stepped in at the last second, finishing it off and claiming 10 points that should have been Setsuna's. Time passed before Drago finally earned 10 points of his own, while Yuzuha sat at 30. Mifune had stolen more in the meantime, pushing his total to 55 and leaving Drago seething. During a short pause, Mifune mocked him, saying skill meant nothing without awareness. He demanded to know how Drago expected to rack up points with such a mindset. Setsuna, holding 25 points, weighed the situation. The rules didn't require splitting loot fairly, but stealing from juniors was low, and seniors should show more discipline. Yuzuha called Mifune out, but he scoffed. To him, they were just weaklings whining about rules. If they hated it so much, why not beat him and take it back? His smirk carried the message that they didn't have what it took. Setsuna kept his focus. He knew better than to underestimate Mifune. Formation magic, with its shifting circles and ability to move objects at will, was versatile and deceptive, but it carried drawbacks too. His eyes shifted to Yuzuha. She had been fixated on slaying monsters since the start, barely caring about the points. Was she chasing something else? Scores climbed. Yuzuha now had 50, Mifune 80. Mifune bragged that a few more victories would seal the deal. Setsuna was at 35, Drago still stuck at 10. They stepped into a dim chamber. Setsuna felt the air grow heavy. In the middle sat an object on a throne. Mifune wasted no time and snatched it with his magic. A dark aura burst from the treasure, leaving him frozen in confusion. Setsuna recognized the danger instantly. He yanked Mifune clear as a violent beam exploded from the chest. A hand clawed its way out, followed by a twisted form rising into the light. Even though this was supposed to be a one-star dungeon, the creature's aura carried a weight that crushed the room. Setsuna understood immediately. It was the no-life king, monarch of death. The air itself seemed to whisper with cursed fire, promising eternal nightmares for its prey. The monster stirred, growling in fury at being disturbed, promising death to intruders. Drago reeled at the sound. It could talk. Setsuna barked for him to stand back. He would deal with it. Drago, still obsessed with points, wondered how much the kill would be worth. The creature lashed out at Mifune, but Setsuna intercepted, cutting through the attack. Drago lunged with a punch, but the beast threw up a barrier that stopped him cold. Drago froze in disbelief, stunned that brute force hadn't even scratched it. The creature cast a magic circle from far off. Setsuna staggered back, realizing the mana guard had likely saved him from real damage. The monster, enraged, lunged forward, swearing it would wipe them out. It unleashed multiple circles at once, and Setsuna recognized the truth. Any beast with that level of intelligence and magic was at least 4-star class. The attacks crashed down. A circle appeared in front of Mifune, but Drago cut through it in time, pulling him clear. Mifune regained his balance with Drago's help, though Setsuna quickly spotted 2 more circles forming around Yuzuha. She just stood there, frozen. He dove, grabbed her, and yanked her out before the attack landed. She nodded weakly when asked if she was fine, though her behavior still felt off. Drago tore apart more circles, forcing a path open. Setsuna touched his bracelet and gave the signal. Drago caught on instantly, but Mifune stayed clueless, muttering that he didn't care what tricks they used. He only wanted points. Drago glared at him, warning him not to try stealing credit again. Mifune promised he wouldn't betray the one who saved him, claiming he'd help, but only to grab the reward later. Drago made it clear he wouldn't let that happen. Setsuna's thoughts drifted back to his battle with Leo in the final blue field. His charged bullet back then had lacked power, and that failure cost him victory. The lesson was clear. The basics had to be mastered before reaching higher levels. He remembered training with Lionel after the court session, when he and Drago asked how to push further. Lionel had sighed, then revealed a method he'd held back: magically weighted bands. Training with them would build raw strength, and once removed, their physical abilities would spike. He warned Setsuna not to push too far, still not fully healed, and reminded them the method was pure brute force. They'd agreed, and since that day, the bands never left their arms. Now, in the middle of the fight, it was time. Both tore the weights off and tossed them aside. Mifune froze, stunned they had been carrying that burden the whole time. The monster raised another circle to attack, but now unshackled, Setsuna and Drago burst forward, speed and strength doubling in an instant. They slipped past the incoming strikes, answering with hard, precise blows. Drago leapt high, driving a kick straight at the beast. The no-life king blocked, but Drago only grinned. Such a defense would have worked before, but not anymore. Setsuna joined him, and the two struck together, landing a crushing hit that detonated with force. The ground trembled. Dust filled the chamber. When it cleared, the no-life king lay broken, its presence erased. Both their bracelets glowed, each score spiking by 50. Drago assumed the split came because they had ended it side by side. Mifune, still reeling, could hardly process what he had seen. Was this the real depth of their strength? Never had he witnessed melee magic students reach such a level. Before he could gather his thoughts, Setsuna turned to call out to Yuzuha, but she had vanished. The ground suddenly shook with violent force. A quake ripped through the dungeon, cracks splitting underfoot. Mifune slipped, about to fall, but Setsuna grabbed him and hauled him back. Their attention snapped forward, An entire swarm of monsters poured from the distance, roaring with bloodlust, charging straight at the students. Panic spread as the students scrambled. Setsuna's pulse thundered. Something was wrong in this dungeon. He, Drago, and Myfune cut down the charging beasts, focusing their strikes on heads to bring them down faster. But Myfune realized no points were appearing from the kills. If Setsuna hadn't figured it out already, they'd be wasting their strength. Through the clash, Setsuna deduced the truth. These creatures, fueled by dark magic, revived endlessly, making the kills worthless. Drago cursed them as hollow targets with nothing to gain. Myfune muttered about how bizarre it was to see monsters like these inside a one-star dungeon. Setsuna felt a foul aura rising from beneath the floor. He told the others the source was below, and though Myfune doubted, Setsuna was certain. The presence reminded him of Yuzuha. Drago moved to descend first, leaving Myfune hesitating, but Setsuna pressed the point. Without them, Myfune was useless. The jab stung, as if Setsuna had questioned his worth. Setsuna even drove it further, calling out that all Myfune had shown so far was stealing points from juniors before moving down himself. Monsters kept flooding in, and Myfune grumbled at the whole ordeal, but followed. Watching Setsuna and Drago fight, he noticed how sharp their coordination was, wondering if this was really their first time training together. Drago snapped at his chatter, only for Myfune to scoff that it beat listening to undead groans. Setsuna pressed toward the source of the foul mana. They found it, an eyeball creature unlike anything Setsuna had seen, pulsing with the circle that spread the dungeon's corruption. He marked it as the core of the outbreak. Myfune, puffing himself up, claimed they should follow his lead since he knew dungeon strategy better. Drago stretched and accidentally clipped him, tossing out a quick apology. Setsuna struck the eyeball beast hard, finishing it and claiming 10 points. The ground rumbled again. Drago stiffened, realizing the undead were already on their way. Setsuna reasoned that the undead must have realized their source was under attack and were swarming to defend it, which meant cutting them down would bring in more points. Drago, restless and hungry for release, welcomed the chance to tear through them. Mifune, by contrast, wondered how Setsuna and Drago showed no fear while he himself could barely hold steady. All he wanted was to reach 100 points and get out of the dungeon fast. Setsuna asked about Yuzova. Mifune admitted he had no idea, guessing she had bolted in fear. But Setsuna wasn't convinced. She hadn't flinched even against the no-life king. Something about her had been off. Dark magic clung to creatures that had no place in a one-star dungeon, leaving him unsettled. He wondered if one of the apostles had a hand in this. If so, Drago and Mifune being here could be deadly. He hoped Layla and the others were safe. The undead surged closer, and Drago called for the hunt. He smashed through the horde with Setsuna and Mifune beside him, bodies piling as points climbed. By the end, Setsuna carried 225, Drago 210, and Mifune 125. Mifune decided he had enough and should leave. Drago questioned why he wasn't looking for Yuzova, but Mifune brushed it off. Yesterday had been the first time they'd spoken, and he thought she was strange for approaching him. She was probably outside, crying somewhere. As he turned to go, Setsuna told Drago they needed to find her. Mifune snapped that he wasn't being transported out, stunned when Setsuna suggested he walk back. Reluctantly, he tagged along. Drago pointed out that the transport spell seemed broken and their bracelets might be compromised. Setsuna once again felt the dark power pulsing from below. He told Drago he'd press forward alone to search for Yuzova, saying he could handle it. Drago, surprised, teased him about being attached to her, then swore he'd help in the search. Setsuna agreed but warned him to retreat if things turned dangerous. Mifune wavered, thinking it smarter to return and report to Giovanni. There was no proof Yuzova was even down there, but Setsuna insisted he could still feel her mana, faint but present. He urged Mifune to deliver word to Giovanni and be cautious. Mifune seethed, convinced Yuzova had abandoned them. Everything seemed to be unraveling, and he doubted both staying and leaving. Drago gripped his shoulder, telling him to stick with them, to find Yuzova and hide. Mifune gave in, saying he would as long as they left once she was found. They descended deeper, and Mifune questioned how only Setsuna could sense her mana. Setsuna explained it was practice. Suddenly Drago froze, the air heavy and thin, every breath harder. They stopped, listening, until a faint sound echoed. Setsuna pointed ahead. Drago advanced, certain someone was there. Mifune wondered if it was her. Relief came when they found Yuzova inside a black circle, half her body swallowed, crying out for help. Mifune shut his eyes, shaken at what he saw. Setsuna blocked Drago, warning him to stay back. Yuzova wasn't just trapped. She was ensnared in an ancient spell. He noted the dungeon showed no signs of the trap being triggered, which made him suspect Yuzova had been caught by an item laced with dark magic. It reminded him of something his friend once picked up from the black market before he went back in time. Setsuna was sure Yuzova hadn't used it willingly, meaning someone had set her up. The trap could only be undone with a specific spell, and only a weapon carrying that spell could shatter it. Driven, Setsuna forced the circle open and dragged Yuzova free. She collapsed against him, and he urged her to stay conscious. The source of the curse was clear: the earrings she wore. Mifune questioned what had happened after she vanished, and whether it could be reversed. Setsuna hauled her onto his back, insisting she had to be protected. Relief hit him that they found her before it escalated further, and he resolved to explain it all to Giovanni later. He was certain the apostles were behind this. Drago kept watch, unsettled by how twisted everything had become, but pushed the reminder that getting Yuzova out was what mattered. Setsuna pressed Mifune to try the transport spell again. Mifune attempted it but got nothing, grumbling that Giovanni might have handed him a faulty bracelet. Setsuna tested his own and found it dead too. Drago urged them to move before things worsened. The ground roared beneath them, rumbling hard, and for a moment they thought it was another quake. Rocks came crashing down, cutting off their path, while Drago barked at Mifune to move faster. Too late. The exit was sealed. Setsuna suggested a safer route instead. Elsewhere, Layla and her team pushed through the dungeon, calling out for survivors. A cry for help led them to a boy pinned under rubble. They pulled him free, and Layla poured healing magic into his wounds. Weak, but alive, the boy insisted there was another trapped deeper behind the rockfall. Layla prayed Setsuna and Drago hadn't been crushed and swore to find them. Back near the collapsed passage, Setsuna's group sat against the stone wall. Drago considered blasting through with a charged bullet, but Setsuna warned it might spark another collapse. Drago argued they stood a good chance of breaking out once the path cleared. Setsuna agreed, but reminded him the thinning air made the risk higher. As Drago worked through options, Setsuna admitted there was a solution, but it meant going further down into the dungeon, and with Mifune and Yuzova in their condition, it wasn't possible yet. Since carrying both was impossible, Setsuna chose to descend alone and investigate. Mifune suspected he had some hidden plan. He knew Setsuna's strength, but stronger monsters could be waiting deeper down. He hesitated, uneasy about letting him risk his life. Setsuna speculated that the earthquake signaled the dungeon's awakening. The broken transportation spell was likely caused by the sheer amount of mana saturating the place, turning what should have been a one-star dungeon into something far more dangerous. Drago noted how quickly Setsuna pieced it together. Setsuna credited his knowledge to a similar event he had already lived through after traveling back in time. Mifune urged Drago to stay back while he wished Setsuna luck. Setsuna told them to mark the path behind and promised to return with a way out. Alone, he pressed forward, wondering if he could really bring down the dungeon boss with only melee magic. Fire or purification would have made short work of the undead. Melee focused on raw physical force, with its main weakness being the lack of reliable elemental use. Yet something inside him felt different, like a storm of power building. Meanwhile, Drago cleared debris while Mifune watched, remembering how he once thought Drago's win in the melee contest had been nothing but luck. But seeing his strength now, he realized how wrong he had been. Both Drago and Setsuna had been grinding away, while he had relied on cheap tricks. Shame gnawed at him. Drago steadied him, telling him they'd find a way out. A sudden voice called from beyond the rockfall. Drago answered, confirming the sound. On the other side, Layla's squad was searching for survivors. One of her men swore he heard movement. Layla, sharp and restless, asked if it was Drago and demanded to know where Setsuna was. Drago explained Setsuna had gone deeper to search for an exit. Layla quickly offered help to clear the rocks. Setsuna, meanwhile, descended further. The air thickened, heavy and oppressive, signaling he was nearing the dungeon's core. A gate loomed ahead, and though it might lead to escape, the boss's aura made him wary. The emptiness of a place so drenched in dark energy unsettled him. Every sense braced for an ambush. From the shadows above, 2 pairs of eyes tracked his movements. A monster lunged and he leapt aside, analyzing its form. Twin heads confirmed its identity, a 2-headed hydra. Setsuna knew immediately what creature had stirred the dungeon into chaos. Decay spread across parts of the hydra's body, proof it had been dragged back from death. Only Vidrak's power could force such a resurrection. The beast spewed poison, and Setsuna leapt clear, knowing staying close for too long would be suicide. If he didn't end this soon, the dungeon would collapse into chaos. He pulled in a clean breath, reminding himself that speed was the key. He surged forward, blades flashing against the monster. Strike after strike cut into its hide until he circled behind, recalling the last time he had faced one of these creatures. A hydra only died when its heads were severed, so he focused on one target. His blows chipped at the skull until he found the weak spot, determined to bring at least one head down. The second head spat acid. He dodged, but droplets splattered onto his clothes, burning holes straight through. If it had touched flesh, he would already be gone. Then the severed head began to grow back. Setsuna froze for an instant, realizing this thing had the same regeneration as the undead. If he fought one head at a time, the fight would never end. Both needed to be destroyed in one strike. With ranged magic, he could have drowned the beast in spells, but he wanted to try a technique he had been preparing. He remembered failing to perform it in the past until Lionel had confronted him, asking if he was training dual wielding. It would have been impressive for any forest student, but Setsuna's body couldn't keep up with the image in his head. Lionel explained the core of it: complete control over internal mana. Back then, Setsuna had been treating his body like the one he had before rewinding time. Now, after constant basic training even during recovery, he finally had sharper control. This was his first attempt since that failure. He concentrated, gripping the blade he trusted most, then reached for the second to launch the attack. The strike came out weak. While airborne, the Hydra's tail smashed him into a wall. He staggered, regained balance, and readied himself again. The technique was draining far more mana than he had expected. The Hydra answered with another acid spray, and he pushed his speed harder, knowing any slowdown meant death. Another hit would finish him. His body wouldn't withstand it, and death here wasn't an option. He stepped back, knowing this was his last shot. A deep breath steadied him. Every drop of energy gathered, focus locked. He forced the Hydra into the wall, then leapt, both blades cutting loose in a storm of strikes. The flurry ended with one head crashing down. As he expected, losing both heads broke its limit. The body collapsed. Regeneration finished. He glanced at his torn hand, admitting the dual blade technique was still clumsy. More training was needed before it became natural. Giovanni appeared, applauding, remarking on how impressive it was to kill his creation with melee magic alone. He even guessed Setsuna had been the one who crushed Liu that night. Setsuna turned toward him. Giovanni noticed the lack of surprise, like Setsuna had been waiting for him. Setsuna made it clear this wasn't the first time he had faced something like this, always ready for any outcome. Giovanni accepted that, saying narrow minds die fast on the battlefield, while Setsuna carried both skill and sharpness. Setsuna demanded answers. Was Giovanni an apostle? And why was he doing this? Giovanni admitted that after watching the contest, one thought consumed him. What a fine specimen. He wanted Setsuna's corpse as an undead puppet, the same way he had taken Yuzova. Setsuna realized then that Giovanni was the one behind her transformation. Giovanni went on, saying she had volunteered to act as his guide. He expected much from her, but she irritated him with needless approaches and foolishly took his earrings without doubt. To him, she should see it as an honor to become undead. Setsuna's fists clenched, fury boiling over. Enough. Giovanni would pay for all of it. Elsewhere, students collapsed after pushing rocks, worn out and cursing their fate. Drago finally spotted Layla, joy flooding his face. Relief crossed hers too. Drago thanked the group for their effort and said it was time to find the way out. Layla admitted she had no idea where they were, but pointed out that the quakes had stopped and the red glow was fading. Drago guessed Setsuna had beaten the dungeon boss. Mifune noticed his bracelet reacting to mana. Layla confirmed it and suggested they climb higher to find a spot where teleportation worked. Drago asked her to take charge since Setsuna hadn't come back yet. He needed to check on him. Layla agreed, promising to wait outside with the rest. Drago thanked her and headed down. Meanwhile, Setsuna burned with rage at Giovanni, swearing revenge. Giovanni brushed it off as easier said than done. Setsuna lunged, fist driving forward, but Giovanni dissolved into ice with Frost Phantom, the blow shattering the frozen decoy. A sharp shard of ice struck Giovanni as he reappeared at a distance. He taunted, calling melee magic crude, weak, only fit for close-range fighting. He mocked the idea that he'd just stand and take such a pitiful blow. Setsuna recognized the type, one who tricked opponents and struck while they were off guard. He also knew he had already burned through a lot of mana fighting the Hydra. The fight needed to end fast. He rushed, analyzing Giovanni's magic, realizing it worked like Mifune's formation tricks. Some mechanism was bound to his teleportation. As Setsuna launched his next strike, ice surged back to block. He turned, spotting a magic circle forming where Giovanni had warped. Another burst of ice tore into Setsuna, and he felt his body dragging from the poison still in his veins. Giovanni sneered, mocking the weakness, claiming it was pathetic and asking why he didn't just give up. Setsuna's rage spiked, swearing that Giovanni would pay, that he would never forgive him, and that the curse on Yuzova would be broken. Giovanni, amused, remarked that Setsuna seemed to know exactly how to undo it. He dismissed Setsuna's concern, saying Yuzova had already served her purpose as bait to bring him here. If Setsuna still wanted to free her, Giovanni had a better idea. He yanked Setsuna by the hair and demanded loyalty. Fury boiled over, and Setsuna swung at him again. Giovanni blinked a short distance away, but Setsuna pressed forward. His blade finally landed, carving through Giovanni's arms. Giovanni stayed calm, calling him a fast learner, then regenerated the limbs with ease. He said Setsuna would join his undead collection eventually, though he still had much to teach. That was when Setsuna realized Giovanni himself was undead. Giovanni confirmed it, claiming he had been on death's door until Vidrak appeared, and gifted him immortality. Now he saw himself as Vidrak's masterpiece. He scorned humans as fragile things, quick to age and rot away, insisting it was his duty to grant them real happiness by giving chosen ones eternal bodies. He taunted Setsuna again, saying the fight was over, that he no longer had the strength to resist. Setsuna's body sagged, head fogging, but he forced himself to think of a way to end it. His strength was slipping fast, then a presence brushed against his senses. Someone was close. Giovanni began chanting beneath him, dark magic crawling across the ground, claiming Setsuna had nothing left. The realization hit. Giovanni was starting the ritual. But before it could build, a stone flew in, striking Giovanni from afar. Drago had arrived. Setsuna seized the chance, driving his fist into Giovanni. Ice flared again, but this time the fight tilted his way. He leapt clear of the circle as shards speared past him. Drago's voice reached him, checking on his condition. Setsuna admitted Drago had just saved his life. Drago scanned the damage across Setsuna's body, but Setsuna brushed it off, saying he could still fight. He asked about Mifune and Yuzova. Drago told him the rest had gone upward, meeting Layla and the other teams. Setsuna was sure that if Layla was with them, they would be safe. Giovanni snarled, furious at the interruption, never expecting Drago. Drago demanded to know if Giovanni was the one behind everything. Setsuna confirmed, stating Giovanni was responsible for all of this and needed to be stopped now. Rage flared in Drago, disgusted that Giovanni had hidden as an instructor while plotting this chaos. Setsuna quickly laid out Giovanni's pattern. They had to stay fast, dodging his strikes. When Giovanni warped, he couldn't do it endlessly. That was their opening. Drago would hit first, and Setsuna would follow, finishing it. Giovanni's ability was slowing, and one last clean attack would end him. Drago readied himself to test it. Giovanni cursed the interference, calling them nothing but annoying pests. Drago rushed him, ice shattered, and Giovanni reappeared at his teleport mark. He warned them not to underestimate his spells, boasting about frostbite. Setsuna seized the opening, hammering him with blows, driving Giovanni into the wall until he crumpled, badly wounded. Setsuna, already drained and at his breaking point, collapsed soon after, slipping into unconsciousness. Barely clinging to strength, Giovanni muttered that this was the last place he thought he would use the gift Vidrak had given him. From his body, he pulled an item, thinking of the Hydra, preparing to fuse it with himself. He turned toward Drago, vowing the fight wasn't finished. Drago froze in disbelief as Giovanni's body twisted, shifting into a monstrous form. Giovanni sneered, spitting venom, blaming the arrogant kids for forcing his hand, claiming he had no choice but to use Vidrak's power to crush them, promising they would regret it. Setsuna hadn't fully blacked out. Through the haze, he realized that if nothing changed, Giovanni would do whatever he pleased. His own vision blurred, consciousness slipping. Then a flare burst into sight, sparking memories of the headmaster's lessons about elemental magic, about its nature and flow. The moment felt just like the trance the headmaster had described. Spirit energy pressed in from all sides. He reached toward the flare, hoping the spirit would give him power to protect them all. A sudden voice snapped through him, telling him to stop his noise. The scene shifted. Stones floated around him, the air nothing like the dungeon. He questioned if he had been carried to another world. Turning, he saw a colossal spirit, surrounded by burning flares, its body massive enough to swallow him whole. Its mana was sharp and hostile, its mere presence overwhelming. Setsuna stood before it, trying to explain. He laid out what Vedrak and his followers were doing, the terror they unleashed on humans, the danger his companions faced. He begged for aid. The spirit bristled, unimpressed. The ground beneath him split apart, flares bursting hotter. Even from a distance, it felt like his flesh was being seared. The spirit allowed him to speak, but treated his words as meaningless noise. It questioned why it should bother with such things, then raised 4 stones that circled around Setsuna. He asked again if the spirit truly intended to ignore him. The response came cold, uninterested in his tale. The stones erupted, fire closing in, wrapping him in a grip of raw heat. The flames were merciless, threatening to burn him to nothing. The spirit mocked him, saying this place had once been calm, but now would be turned into a burning curse, reducing him to ash. Setsuna knew surrender meant death. He had to find a way to reach it. The spirit noticed his mind hadn't broken, something no ordinary human could endure. Then it felt the spirit of time lingering inside him. Setsuna screamed, begging to be heard. The spirit saw his refusal to yield and called him troublesome. It said it wasn't its place to deal with a corrupt beast from another world and its foul servants. Setsuna thought of the other world, questioning if the spirit knew about Vedrak. Determined, he declared that he would defeat them, and for that reason demanded the spirit's strength. The spirit's flames surged, declaring the task beyond him, that no matter how hard he fought, he would be trapped in endless space, burning for eternity. Setsuna refused to care, refusing to retreat. The spirit paused, told him to prove it, then unleashed hellfire. Pain tore through Setsuna as his body burned, lungs refusing air. Sensation faded, yet he forced himself to remain conscious. His thoughts turned to Drago, wondering what was happening inside the dungeon, what Drago was doing. It was too soon to stop, not while Vedrak still lived. He forced his strength together again, pleading for the spirit's power to save everyone from Vidrak's grasp. The spirit, incredulous, considered it impossible. No human should survive those flames, yet Setsuna's will still clung to protecting those outside. Even unconscious, his body still stood against the inferno. The spirit found it amusing. At last, it cast him out, telling him to take its power and punish the villains. Power from the spirit flooded into him. Meanwhile, in the dungeon, Drago felt an odd satisfaction, realizing his mana guard had failed to block the ice spell. Giovanni mocked him, impressed that a mere human endured so long, fueled only by pride as a melee mage. But his fight was useless. Giovanni smirked, seizing Drago by the collar. Drago's senses dulled from the earlier hit. Giovanni promised to end him with a single strike, along with the companions he wanted to save, cutting them apart. He threw Drago against the wall. Drago realized his mana guard was gone, his techniques spent. His thoughts returned to his parents, his father's words praising his body as a shield meant to protect his friends. He recalled the true worth of melee magic. Regret struck. He had failed to protect them as his father had hoped. Giovanni's attack neared, and Drago saw no way to stop it. Then something stirred. Giovanni faltered. Surprised Drago lasted so long, questioning if he had drained himself too much. He looked again. Drago was gone. Setsuna now stood, flares burning around him. Drago felt the heat close by and realized it was Setsuna. Giovanni's shock froze him at the sight of Setsuna's new form. Then Setsuna vanished. In an instant he reappeared, driving a crushing punch that hurled Giovanni into the wall. Giovanni questioned how a close combat mage could wield elemental magic. His recovery was slowing, and the flames surrounding Setsuna were unlike anything he had seen. Another crest burned across Setsuna's body, proof of 2 different magical lines, something that should not exist. Fear pressed at Giovanni, though he refused to admit it. He shouted denial, declaring himself undead, beyond death itself. Poison burst in a vortex, certain no living being could withstand it. Setsuna moved cleanly, brushing the poison aside with nothing more than a release of mana. Giovanni staggered, stunned by the sheer force pouring from him, unable to understand where such power came from. He saw Setsuna's control fraying, his strength wild and unstable, and mocked him for blacking out mid-fight. He slashed for Setsuna's back, aiming to cut him down, but Setsuna dodged as if by instinct. Giovanni froze, realizing if he stopped those movements, victory would be his. A strike landed square on Setsuna, locking him in place. Giovanni sneered, calling him a human crawling in a world of dragons, vowing to sever his head and prove undeath superior to life. Layla arrived, cutting into the fight. She apologized for being late and swore he would not harm Setsuna again. Giovanni, focused on Setsuna, barely noticed her until he struck at her too. She looked at Setsuna, flames still wrapping his fading form, and wondered what had happened to him. She swore to protect him, even as Giovanni bore down. Setsuna's mind fell back into the place of the spirit. The spirit mocked him as a weak human smothered by shallow flames. Setsuna denied it, insisting the spirit misunderstood, believing they had already fused. Layla's face flashed before him. He demanded to know how to master the power and return. The spirit refused to guide him, ordering him to find the answer himself, admitting it had never granted power to a human before. In the dungeon, Giovanni's attack dropped Layla to the floor. Even as she struggled, she recalled Setsuna's words, that with resolve, even someone like her could grow strong. She remembered a woman's hand on her head, a voice telling her not to rush. That strength came with resolve. She forced herself back up against Giovanni's assault. The spirit stirred with interest, curious if Layla's fall would mark Setsuna's end as well. If so, the spirit mused, then it would be the one to kill him. Giovanni's strike sent Layla crashing down again, but Setsuna surged forward, the flame spirit's magic erupting from him, fire swallowing Giovanni. Setsuna spat back his words. Immortality was no blessing. Humans lived on limited time, and that was why they fought, struggled, and grew. Only on the brink of death had he seized the fire spirit's magic. Giovanni raged in denial, calling it impossible, but the flames consumed him. Layla, wounded but conscious, called out, asking if this was really Setsuna. He confirmed it, told her things were safe now, and thanked her for protecting him. He asked about her wounds. She answered that she was fine, relieved they had both survived. Drago, astonished, admitted he never expected Layla to arrive. She explained that as seniors they had escaped with teleportation magic, but her instincts dragged her back here. She told them to report to the professors and wait for help. Then Setsuna felt the strange pull and collapsed. All three of them lay unconscious when the rescue squad arrived. A woman checked them, saw they were alive, and praised the efforts of the melee magic students. A man lifted Setsuna to his feet, explaining they had heard from Mifune and rushed to help. Setsuna told them to tend to Layla and Drago first, but then saw they were already being carried away. Later, he opened his eyes in a quiet room and realized he was back in the infirmary. Sitting up, he muttered to himself that it felt like he had become a regular patient there. The heat of the last fight still lingered inside his body. Lionel entered, noticing he was awake, and walked over to sit. Setsuna asked about the others. Lionel told him that even while unconscious for 3 days, Setsuna had worried about them. He assured him Drago, Layla, and the senior from the formation class were safe. Setsuna was the last to wake. Lionel explained that he had heard Setsuna fought a powerful opponent and that the principal had already taken measures to resolve the aftermath. Setsuna thought it was better that much remained unknown. Lionel then apologized for the incident involving Leo, saying there were others like him, dangerous figures hidden in plain sight. An internal investigation had been ordered but delayed by recent chaos, and no one had noticed Giovanni's ambition until it was too late. Lionel admitted regret that students had been put in danger twice and swore it would not happen again. He lowered his head in apology. Setsuna told him to lift it, but before he could continue, pain surged through his body. Lionel caught him, explaining it was the after effect of using mana far beyond his limit. The wounds themselves were already healed by recovery magic, so he had nothing left to worry about. Lionel added that it was thanks to the one who had rushed in to treat him. Setsuna wondered who that person had been. A knock echoed against the door. Lionel said the person had arrived themselves. The door opened, and Professor Zachtery walked in holding peeled apples meant for him. Lionel smacked him on the back, warning him not to interfere since he wanted to speak first. But Zachtery's expression hardened. He admitted his fault for the way he had treated Setsuna during the orientation test. He confessed he had looked down on the close combat department as the weakest and hated seeing someone like Setsuna there. Then he revealed his past, once an honors student of the academy. But when he realized his path was limited to melee magic, His own family and friends abandoned him. Knowing Setsuna had chosen melee magic willingly, despite having the ability to walk any path, had fueled his resentment. Zakhtari could not grasp why someone like Setsuna would willingly choose close combat magic over any other path, but his view shifted after reading the report. Setsuna's team had achieved the highest score in joint training, and he himself had set a new record for the Close Combat Academy. That feat alone had caused the planned joint drill with the kingdom's Megas battalion to be cancelled. What mattered more to Zakhtari, however, was that Setsuna had proved the department could stand on equal ground with the rest. He reached out his hand, giving thanks for the proof. Setsuna thought the man before him seemed like an entirely different person now. Though maybe it only felt that way because the first impression had been so rotten. He reached back, offering his own hand, admitting that he also owed Zakhtari gratitude for saving him. Zakhtari accepted and left, saying they would meet in class. Once alone, Lionel produced a glove, explaining it had come from the principal. Bandages would not serve as a permanent cover for the mark on Setsuna's hand. The glove had been crafted for the crest of spirit magic, an ancient mark no one had seen or even heard of in generations. Setsuna asked if Lionel knew about spirit magic. Lionel told him it was the same as ancient magic, the very force that sparked the Great Magic War a century earlier, and it had been outlawed ever since. He warned Setsuna not to reveal it, because if the Holy Church discovered it, disaster would follow. Setsuna remembered the history lessons about forbidden magic, and never thought that particular power had been spirit magic. He asked Lionel how he even knew such details. Lionel explained that the principal had told him enough about the evil god, the apostles, spirit magic, and even Setsuna's return from the future. Within the academy, only Lionel and the principal carried that knowledge. Relief ran through Setsuna knowing Lionel understood, though he doubted if revealing his secret had been the wisest choice. Lionel brushed it aside, saying he didn't care about past lives. What mattered was that Setsuna was now a student of the Close Combat Department. Setsuna thanked him, then asked about the principal. Lionel answered that the man had gone to chase down a clue on the apostles and would be away for a while. Setsuna wondered what kind of clue that could be. Lionel stood, saying Setsuna could ask him when he returned. For now, rest was more important, and when Setsuna recovered, Lionel had something else to tell him. Setsuna wondered what it was as Lionel left the room. He looked at his hand, replaying the fight. He had drawn out the spirit's power. It should have ended badly, yet he had managed to contain it, thanks to Layla, but he doubted he could repeat it. Removing the bandages, he stared at the mark burned into his palm, weighing the immense power it carried. A voice echoed suddenly, confirming the thought. The voice said it was true, and warned that a human like him should not believe he could master the spirit's power so easily. Setsuna froze, wondering if the spirit itself had spoken, but when he glanced around, the room was empty. Something stirred beneath the blanket on Setsuna's body. A small creature shot out with startling speed and landed on his head. The pet introduced itself with cheer, announcing its arrival. Setsuna questioned if this was really the spirit. The creature confirmed, saying it was, but scolded him for calling it so casually. It gave its name as Blazer, demanding it not be forgotten. Setsuna looked at him and thought the image didn't quite match the overwhelming figure he had seen before. Blazer hopped to the window, eyes wide at the sight of modern human society, everything appearing massive from his small frame. Setsuna guessed that was because of Blazer's size and wondered if it mattered. Blazer dismissed it, saying the world wasn't inherently special, but admitted it gave him a fresh view. It was his first time in this form. Setsuna asked why he had taken such a form. Blazer answered that he normally ignored questions like that but would explain. Their bond was tied through the crest, and keeping his presence stable required mana. If he remained in his true form, Setsuna's supply would burn out instantly. Shrinking himself allowed the flow to last. Setsuna saw his chance and asked about the spirit's role in the Great Magic War a century ago, and what became of it. Blazer's tone shifted. He claimed he remembered little, saying he had simply raged during his old contractor's war and had no interest in the past. He preferred the present. Without warning, he sprinted out of the room. Setsuna chased him. Knowing if the Holy Church discovered a spirit's existence, they would both be dragged into an inquisition. He had to stop him before that happened. By the time he reached the outside, Blazer was already drawing stares. Some students mistook him for a dog. Others, especially the girls, squealed over how cute he looked. Setsuna shouted after him, demanding he stop. Blazer spun in surprise, mocking how weak Setsuna's body was and doubting if he could even keep up. Setsuna gritted his teeth, thinking that if his body had fully recovered, he would show him. Blazer darted further, and Setsuna pushed after him, running straight into Noel. Noel sneered, saying Setsuna's win in the exchange match had been nothing but luck, boasting that his golems could now endure anything Setsuna threw at them. Setsuna ignored him and kept moving. Noel's scowl deepened as he watched him go. Carl appeared next, puffed up and acting noble, claiming he forgave Setsuna's earlier disrespect. He began to bring up Layla, but Setsuna brushed past without care. Carl fumed at being ignored, muttering about Setsuna's disrespect. Setsuna dismissed him with cold indifference, telling him not to overthink it. From the shadows, Silas observed quietly. Evening settled in as Setsuna reached a hall, finally forced to admit he couldn't match Blazer's pace. He collapsed, catching his breath. Mifune noticed his condition and asked what had left him so exhausted. Nearby, a girl whispered to another, asking if he was the close combat mage who had trained with Mifune during joint training. The second confirmed, adding that he had only reached the top thanks to Mifune's help. Mifune snapped at them, ordering them not to insult his friend again. When the girls left, Mifune turned to Setsuna, apologizing, saying the tension in the academy had grown since Setsuna's high score in training, even if no one understood the full picture. Setsuna admitted he never expected Mifune to consider him a friend. Mifune answered simply that everyone was worth being seen as one. Setsuna thought Mifune's personality stood out as unusual. Mifune circled back to the joint training, bringing up Yusufa, who had been caught in a trap. Her life hadn't been threatened, but the after effects lingered. She was now imprisoned and under questioning by the professors. Setsuna suspected Giovanni's hand in it and grew wary. He asked if Mifune had seen a small red creature nearby. Mifune pointed toward the courtyard. Setsuna decided they had to move at once. In the courtyard, Blazer played idly with flowers. Students gathered, puzzled by the strange creature. None had seen anything like it, and wondered who it belonged to. Akhtar, watching as well, questioned if it was some sort of magical beast. Setsuna called for Blazer, but Akhtar's face darkened when he noticed him. To Akhtar, Setsuna was becoming more of a nuisance, especially after erasing the proof of his manipulation during the exchange battle. Even so, a sharp-eyed professor had already spotted flaws in his setup. Realizing the creature was tied to Setsuna, Akhtar formed a plan. If he accused Setsuna of bringing a magical beast into the academy, he could justify striking it under the guise of protecting the school. He readied himself to attack Blazer, certain no one could fault him afterward. Blazer looked wary for a moment, but quickly retaliated, blasting fire and blowing the strike away. Akhtar froze, shocked. His front burned, clothes charred, and shame forced him to retreat in a rush. Setsuna exhaled, relieved that Blazer had avoided harm, but whispers rose among the other students, their stares heavy. They had seen Akhtar humiliated and witnessed the raw firepower Blazer unleashed even in his shrunken form. Concern spread. If such force was possible in that body, the threat was undeniable. One boy muttered about the strength of the flames, astonished by their scale. Another questioned if so much fire could really come from a creature that small. Blazer dismissed their chatter, asking if they were all allies of the police boy. The crowd, uneasy, backed away and left. Layla had been watching closely. When Setsuna noticed, he took a step back. She seemed deep in thought. Blazer needled her, asking what she was plotting, warning that he could burn her too. Setsuna thought Blazer meant it. As she drew closer, Blazer remarked that she seemed ready for it. Layla dropped to her knees, thanking him for aiding Setsuna in the dungeon, bowing in gratitude for saving her treasured friend. Blazer approved, telling her to be grateful he had tied his power to Setsuna. Setsuna caught the shift in Blazer's tone. Layla picked fruit from a basket, offering it to Blazer, saying she had brought it during her visit to Setsuna. Blazer accepted the gift and ate, remarking on its quality. Blazer quickly added that it wasn't so bad and even admitted he liked it. Setsuna figured the spirit was proving to be easily tamed. While the students ate, Blazer made himself comfortable on Layla's lap, devouring her food without hesitation. Layla noted his ravenous appetite and turned to Setsuna, asking what sort of creature he was. Setsuna answered that Blazer was a magical beast. He knew if the truth of Blazer being a spirit came out, the church would intervene, and even Drago couldn't be dragged into that mess. For now, caution was still necessary, though Blazer showed no immediate danger to the others. With Layla's plate already emptied, Setsuna slid his own food forward, thanking her. She stayed quiet. To him, Blazer only looked uneasy from being surrounded by so many people. As a pair of students walked past, the girl whispered that Setsuna was the close combat mage who had scored highest in joint training. The boy's eyes fell on Blazer, saying he had never seen such a creature before. Just as Blazer leaned toward Setsuna's food, he muttered that something like him would naturally draw attention. Idle chatter would be ignored, but anything beyond that wouldn't. Setsuna realized Blazer was being treated like some rare animal. Blazer then turned to Layla, saying that if she kept bringing gifts like that, he'd make her his subordinate. Setsuna was relieved that no one else could hear the spirit's voice except him. He then looked at both Layla and Drago, thanking them for saving him in the dungeon. Layla answered that helping a friend was only natural. Drago, as blank-faced as always, pulled out an envelope. He explained his parents had heard about his top score in training and were so proud they sent a letter, making him feel honored to stand as a close combat mage. Setsuna was glad and smiled at the thought. Layla shifted the mood, voicing concern over Giovanni's identity. Setsuna admitted he wasn't sure, but they would know more once Yuzo's interrogation ended. His mind drifted back to their first encounter with Giovanni, convinced the man was an apostle. The only distinct ability Giovanni showed was controlling the Hydra, and that alone was proof enough. Drago's expression hardened as he asked about the strange power Setsuna had displayed in the dungeon. He had seen the energy field made of mana, and it didn't resemble close combat magic at all. Setsuna stalled, uncertain how to answer. Layla then guessed aloud that Blazer had lent his strength to him. Hearing this, Blazer admitted she had sharp perception, since she recognized the source of the power. Setsuna thought the spirit had already been completely domesticated, leaving him strangely empty as he fumbled for how to explain it. The moment broke when Professor Silas barked Setsuna's name. As Silas closed in, two nearby students whispered if he was about to scold someone again. Silas snapped at them to leave, and they scattered. He pointed straight at Blazer, demanding to know what kind of creature he was, remarking that he didn't look like one of the forbidden beasts. Setsuna's stomach sank. The situation had turned bad. Silas pressed further, berating him for not registering his pet with the academy. At the word pet, Blazer bristled in rage. Silas narrowed his eyes, questioning if there was a valid reason for Blazer's presence, warning that if not, he would take steps to have the animal removed. Blazer's fury boiled, ready to strike back, but before anything happened, Zetri appeared. He cut in quickly, apologizing for the mistake. He claimed he had received the registration form, but had carelessly forgotten it, bowing low to Silas in apology. Everyone understood Zetri was covering for Setsuna. Silas, caught off guard, looked at him in disbelief, remarking that a professor was bowing his head for a student, especially one like Setsuna, who now stood as the top and most decorated in the close combat department. The sight left him embarrassed. Zachary, still bent forward, admitted it was as Silas said. Drago, irritated, slammed the table and got up, striding toward him. With a sharp grin, he declared the close combat department's victory and the joint training was thanks to Zetri. Setsuna and Layla also stepped closer, offering their thanks. Setsuna expressed his gratitude directly, while Layla, even recognizing Zetri's questionable ways, acknowledged that he had acted for their sake. Zetri, moved by their words, looked emotional, but also seemed to bask in the recognition. Silas, frowning deeper, questioned the absurdity of what they were all saying, and doubted anyone could take it seriously. A girl whispered to a boy that the close combat department was ranked above Silas's group now. The boy added it was no wonder Silas strutted around with such pride. Their remark struck a nerve, and Silas snapped, ordering them to hand in the paperwork by morning without excuses. Setsuna exhaled, relieved the situation hadn't blown up further, and noticed Blazer on the verge of losing control but still holding back. He turned back to Zachary, thanking him for stepping in, even if the professor didn't know the full story, and appreciated the way he had backed them. Zachary smiled and said the thanks should go the other way, adding that there must have been a reason for bringing the creature. Drago, impressed, said Zachary was the kind of professor others should look up to. Layla agreed, but Blazer brushed it all aside as pointless talk. Blazer and Setsuna left soon after. As they walked, a bird swooped down carrying a scroll. Setsuna opened it and found a letter praising his success with spirit magic. It also carried a warning. The principal feared he might struggle to control it while still recovering. The principal had wanted to train him personally, but being unavailable, arranged for another instructor to take his place. Setsuna wondered who this new teacher would be and what guidance they could offer for handling spirit magic. The letter said Layla would be the one to introduce this person. It ended with the principal wishing him good fortune. Setsuna felt thankful for the support. Elsewhere in a quiet house, an old woman read a letter and scoffed at its contents. Nearby, a girl swept the floor, a bucket of water resting beside her. The old woman grumbled about having to train someone new in spirit magic. She cursed the principal for exposing her methods without consent. Even if the boy carried the principal's recommendation, she vowed she wouldn't forgive him if he proved useless. If that happened, she would deal with him herself. The focus shifted again, this time to the urgent magic conference, where Principal Dan Ham delivered the report of his findings. One person questioned if Dan Ham's proposal was really enough to solve the problem. Another pointed to the growing signs of the evil god and the dark apostles, which made his words even more unsettling. A woman dismissed it, saying he had no solid proof. Dan Ham countered that the enemies left no evidence behind at all, which was exactly why he sought their help. Some still refused to accept it, while one suggested Dan might have overlooked something vital. After the tense meeting, Dan and Step stepped out of the chamber and met Leon, commenting on how chaotic it had been. Lionel, present with them, said it was expected. Dan and Step sat down, admitting that disbelief was understandable. Lionel reminded them they were dealing with forbidden spirit magic, something not easily spoken about. Dan and Step added that such an occurrence couldn't simply be ignored, and if the apostles acted, Dan's proposal would at least serve as preparation. Danik then shifted the topic to Setsuna's condition. Lionel reported he was recovering steadily, though he was straining himself too much and needed more time to fully heal. Danon remarked that the new teacher lined up for him was strict, and he hoped Setsuna would regain his strength before facing that instructor. Meanwhile, in his room, Setsuna slept while Carol sat by his side, keeping watch. When he woke and saw her, he was caught off guard. She explained she had come after hearing about his condition, bringing food to help him recover. As she opened the boxes, she revealed the recipe was something Drago had shown her. Setsuna thanked her, especially for looking after Blazer since the day before. Carol brushed it off, saying she had taken Blazer out around town together with Layla. She had also brought fruit for Blazer, whose little voice sounded like a short cue. Setsuna understood then why so many found Blazer so endearing. Carol spoke of how remarkable Layla was, noting she treated Blazer without even a trace of hostile mana. Setsuna asked if that was really the case, and Carol confirmed, saying Layla had done it as if it were the most natural thing. She explained that treating someone without creating barriers mattered, especially with tasks as difficult as that. Because she was always surrounded by phantom beasts, Carol could sense how much they valued kindness. Setsuna thought that was just like Layla, and reflected that she had been looking out for him ever since the dungeon incident. He couldn't just stay passive through it all. Once his body recovered, he would need guidance on handling spirit magic. Carol set aside the remaining food and left for class, reminding him to bring Blazer back with him. Setsuna thought about how Carol and Layla had been caring for Blazer while he still had to gather all the knowledge he could on spirit magic. He remembered reading about a great war 2 centuries earlier, when the followers of a certain figure tried to dominate other magi. Battles had raged across continents. The power of outside magic was overwhelming, though only a handful could wield it, and in the end the magi had prevailed, leaving peace behind. Whenever an ancient magic user surfaced, they were interrogated and purged, with the knowledge itself marked as too dangerous to spread. This was why Setsuna kept his contract with Blazer hidden. He lay back, remembering that in his past life, he had never even known about spirit magic. If he could master it now, it would bring him closer to crushing the evil god. But his thoughts drifted to what had already changed: the clash with Leo during the exchange match, and Giovanni's berserker at the joint training, both events absent from his former timeline. If history itself was shifting, were his choices the right ones? Days later, fully recovered, Setsuna was ready to train with Lionel. Carol looked displeased and asked if he was sure. He confirmed, pointing out it was during the academy's break. Drago announced he would train hard not to fall behind. Setsuna accepted the challenge. Layla, however, was downcast, knowing she'd be apart from Blazer and would feel lonely. Blazer demanded she stock up on fruit for his return. Setsuna appreciated how much Carol and Layla had done, but now he had to leave. Both girls wished him caution. Lionel noted how fortunate Setsuna was to have friends like them. Setsuna agreed, but thought only of Blazer, worried if he could handle caring for him alone, knowing he couldn't rely on Layla forever. They reached the carriage stop, ready for the long road ahead. Setsuna suggested the lizard carriage, but Lionel warned that handling them wasn't easy. Still, it was the best transport for distance, since all they had to do was hold tight. The lizard keeper told them the beasts were fast, the ride rough, and he wouldn't be responsible for injuries. Setsuna accepted that, thinking it depended on how one resonated with the animal. He climbed on with ease, treating the lizard naturally, and it responded. Settling in, he thought it felt fine. The keeper clapped, startled, admitting he had misjudged him because of his age. Most people struggled at first, he explained. Setsuna recalled riding creatures like this before, in another life. As he and Lionel set out, Blazer seemed thrilled by the ride. Setsuna noticed Lionel pale and asked if he was sick. Lionel admitted he wasn't used to it yet. The trip was cut short when 3 armed women blocked their path. Something about them was off. They didn't look like common bandits. Just as Lionel suspected, one revealed they were Jabardast, servants of the witch Morgana. Setsuna recognized the name. It had been written in the principal's letter. The woman called him out, labeling him a spirit magic user. Lionel explained their travel, then questioned if these 3 had come to capture them. One woman suddenly shifted her tone, saying she had no interest in a mere close combat mage. The sudden change made Lionel tense, demanding to know if she was truly Morgana's servant. Setsuna dismounted, trying to gauge what they were. Lionel whispered the truth. These weren't human. Setsuna then understood they were alchemic dolls. One fixed her eyes on him, saying he must have been picked by a spirit by luck. If not, she dared him to prove it by defeating them. They attacked without pause. One lunged straight at Setsuna, who raised his sword and blocked the blow. Lionel pulled the lizards back, then answered with a crushing punch at their enemies. Setsuna broke down the situation, realizing that for dolls to wield such strength, their master had to be on another level entirely. One of the women smirked, mocking that he was cornered, claiming she had no reason to explain spirit magic to a close combat magus. Lionel, irritated by her arrogance, snapped back, calling her out for underestimating them. He summoned a massive sword, making it clear he was ready to fight for real. Setsuna understood that to gain Morgana's acknowledgement, he had to crush the dolls. Lionel reminded him they had no other path but to fight. The women launched a giant orb of magic, and both reacted instantly. Lima signaled Setsuna not to evade but to push through. He slashed the orb apart, and Setsuna saw firsthand the raw power of the Zamana blade. Another of the women remarked on their skill, then all 3 charged again. Their weapons crackled with lightning. One swung at Setsuna, and he dodged at the last second. Another fired a blast of black lightning at both him and Lionel, forcing them to leap clear. The third raised her weapon, and Lionel warned that if it connected, the surge would fry them alive. Setsuna caught on quickly and threw himself aside, narrowly escaping the spreading electricity. Morgana's voice cut through, observing that if close combat fighters were weak against elemental magic, then attrition would eventually crush them. Setsuna reflected on why melee users struggled. When elemental attacks landed, the body took the brunt of the damage. Magi who fought with external mana absorbed far less, making survival possible, while close combat mages had to endure it head-on. Against pure elemental force, endurance was nearly impossible. Morgana mocked further, pointing out that even modern magus armies relied on golems and summoned beasts to hold the front lines. She dismissed close combat mages as relics, claiming Setsuna and Lionel stood no chance against her creations. Setsuna admitted to himself that melee fighters had lost their place, but that didn't mean their potential was gone. He slipped past an attack, closing in, and proved his point with a crushing punch. On the other side, Lionel fought the second doll. Spotting an opening, he hammered her in the back, holding back enough not to destroy her, only to disable. The fight pressed on, the dolls relentless, forcing Setsuna and Lionel to dodge blow after blow. Setsuna focused, channeling power into his hand, envisioning the strongest weapon possible in this moment. When one doll lunged, he vaulted aside, grabbed a tree branch, used it to propel himself into the air, and struck with a heavy kick from behind. Morgana watched, noting how they twisted the structure of the mana blade and used the terrain to their advantage. Lionel, meanwhile, kept pressing another opponent with heavy strikes. Setsuna noticed that his blows were aimed to aid Lionel against his opponent, and he reflected that his hardened body, sharpened through training, paired with refined technique and mana control, was what made it possible. If they used their abilities correctly, close combat would never fall short. A strike landed on the ground, forcing Lionel to leap back. The 3 women locked hands, and Morgana's voice carried through them, making clear that surprise attacks were useless. She questioned how they would pierce elemental magic at such close range. The women shaped a sphere of magic. Setsuna thought that if the attack wasn't aimed at him directly, he could shatter it with a charged bullet. Still, He knew its force would weaken against the water magic flowing through it. Blazer suddenly appeared, dismissing the spell as nothing difficult. He claimed that if his power was unleashed, the entire forest could be reduced to ash. Setsuna's elemental magic ignited, flares of raw energy circling him. Blazer commended his focus, then pushed to ramp up the firepower to burn everything down. The pressure sharpened into pain, and Setsuna demanded he hold back. Blazer halted, questioning why he hesitated. Did he not want victory over the three women? Setsuna admitted he wanted to win, but this fight was meant to test his own strength. Blazer scoffed at the notion. Then, the barrier vanished. Morgana's order reached her servants. Bring Setsuna to her. Lionel looked on, baffled at the sudden change. The women apologized for their conduct and asked him to follow. They arrived at a grand house where Morgana waited beside a girl. She called Setsuna by name, and he understood who stood before him. She demanded to know why he had withheld his spirit magic during the fight. Against a water barrier, melee alone would have failed, and spirit magic could have broken it. Setsuna admitted she was right, but said he could not expose spirit magic recklessly against unknown foes. If he had unleashed it there, the forest would have been incinerated, the wildlife destroyed for no reason, an outcome he refused to accept. Morgana judged him soft, yet praised the restraint of not using spirit magic he couldn't yet command. Had he done so, he would have lost, but she would teach him how to wield it. Setsuna lowered his head in thanks. Blazer, listening, wondered if she was serious about controlling him. It sounded absurd, Morgana countered, saying that no matter his strength, Setsuna was still a rough, untamed beast. Blazer answered by vowing to show her his true form. Blazer's body swelled, drawing mana straight from Setsuna without restraint. Setsuna realized in shock that Blazer was draining him by force. The spirit threatened to burn Morgana to the bone if it came to that. Panic hit Setsuna. He couldn't rein in Blazer's power, and if it continued, the entire forest would go up in flames. Morgana cut through his fear, pointing out there were no other humans in the forest, which gave her control over the situation. But she wouldn't allow Blazer to torch everything. She summoned her own spirit, ready to show Setsuna how a real bond was handled. Blazer hurled a fireball at her, but the flames splashed harmlessly as Morgana's body shifted into water, reforming without effort. She declared the fight over and pulled a colossal surge of water from the lake, shocking Lionel. The torrent rushed over Blazer, dousing his flames. She explained that Blazer had only a shallow bond with Setsuna, making the spirit nothing more than a wild beast. If a true bond existed, Setsuna could manifest and command that power freely. The idea of mastering nature at such a level took hold in Setsuna's mind. When the clash ended, Morgana broke down the stages of spirit magic. First, becoming one with nature. Second, entering the spirit world at will, confronting the spirit and gaining true recognition. She revealed that Setsuna had forced a contract without finishing even the first stage, which left his spirit magic incomplete. Frustrated, she cursed Daham, calling him a brat and blaming him for failing to teach Setsuna properly. Setsuna froze. He couldn't believe she would refer to the headmaster like that. Morgana then pointed out that the forest brimmed with spirits, making it the perfect ground to reach selflessness. His training would start the next day. She demanded he prove the qualities that made the spirit choose him. The following morning, he trained in the forest under her eye. He meditated, practiced, helped with chores, and kept the house in order. Days passed until one night, training near the lake, glowing lights drifted around him. He recognized the presence of nature itself. Looking at the house on the cliff, he whispered to himself that he was ready to face Blazer. When they gathered again, Morgana noted that he had managed to sense the spirits in only 2 weeks, a rare achievement. From there, he had to enter the spirit world and form a bond. She warned that inside the spirit world, magic meant nothing, only raw will and strength counted. Even with the ability to perceive spirits, she said, Blazer alone would still overwhelm him, so she chose to accompany him. Blazer found the situation odd, but doubted Morgana's ability to fight him in the spirit world. Morgana warned Setsuna not to get arrogant. Setsuna answered that all he needed was Blazer's approval. Morgana turned to Lionel, explaining that once inside the spirit world, their bodies would be left completely defenseless. Since this hideout was guarded, she left their protection in his hands. Lionel accepted, promising to guard them. Morgana told Setsuna to reach selflessness first. Once he did, the gate to the spirit world would open. Setsuna followed Morgana's lead, and when his eyes opened, he stood face to face with Blazer. Morgana at his side. Morgana judged Blazer's arrogance as empty pride. Setsuna realized that without perceiving spirits before, he had never grasped the full weight of Blazer's power. Blazer noticed the shift and sneered, sensing Morgana was treating the matter more seriously. She raised a barrier, explaining it was to shield Blazer's will, warning that if Setsuna clashed with him head-on, he might never return from the spirit world. Blazer dismissed it, mocking her, claiming her resolve wasn't enough to restrain his strength. Setsuna's anger boiled. He reminded himself that no one had trained harder in magic control than him. Since spirit power followed the same rules, he could command it. Reaching selflessness meant nothing could bind him now. If he needed Blazer's recognition, he still had one way left to prove it. Blazer cautioned him not to regret carrying such a burden. Far away, Lionel and a girl watched from the house. Lionel noted that Setsuna had begun, confident he would endure. But then he sensed a foul power moving closer, a malicious force aimed straight for the hideout. At this moment, he couldn't let anything disrupt the clash between Setsuna and Blazer. The door opened under the weight of the aura. Leo stepped in, voice calm as he excused his presence, asking if anyone was inside. His eyes fell on Lionel, recognizing him as a close combat teacher, then spotted Setsuna, making his task easier. Lionel identified Leo immediately, the runaway student the academy had been chasing. To think Leo had come straight to them. Suddenly, the wall shattered. Zagan stormed in, striking a doll and calling it his recruit. He declared he would take both Morgana and Setsuna. Leo, stunned at his claim, reminded him of their old friendship and asked if he couldn't settle for just Morgana and her servant. Lionel's face hardened. Zagan was also an apostle. Worst timing possible. If not for being a teacher, he would have fled. Leo sensed the weight in the air and told Lionel he wasn't the target, that he could walk away. But Lionel refused. A mana sword formed in his grip as he warned Leo not to insult him. At this academy, no teacher abandoned their students. He charged without hesitation. Inside the spirit world, Blazer told Morgana she would never make him yield, dismissing her words as hollow. Setsuna steadied himself, reminding his own heart that here, willpower ruled, and he had to stay firm. His eyes turned to Morgana, questioning the disturbance. She admitted something was wrong outside. Yule presence had invaded the forest, and her servants had already fallen. Setsuna's chest tightened, but he urged Morgana to push forward. Morgana warned that once the barrier was gone, the spirit's will might burn Setsuna completely and trap him in the spirit world with no way back. Setsuna ignored her caution, deciding the trial was his alone to endure, and told her to guard the teacher and servants instead. Blazer gave a final command, ordering him to return, saying death here would make all his training worthless. Setsuna promised he would come back. Morgana, seeing his resolve, lowered the barrier. Setsuna apologized to Blazer for the delay. Blazer demanded to know why he wanted such power far beyond his grasp, questioning if Setsuna was ready to scorch himself for it. Setsuna answered that in the past world before his regression, he had lost everything. Blazer paused, recognizing that the scene before them reflected Setsuna's own mind. Setsuna went on, explaining how the magic army had been twisted by the apostles, how the world had crumbled beyond repair, how every mentor he had was stolen from him. That regret had stirred the time spirit's power and dragged him back. Now he swore nothing would ever be taken from him again. Blazer found it curious, debating if this drive came from revenge or challenge, calling it a raw piece of human will. To confront despair without flinching was madness, and Setsuna embodied it well. Blazer admitted he was fit to be tested, but warned that the demand wasn't for fragments of power, it was for all of it. He shifted into a smaller, human-like form, declaring the trial would not be a simple duel, but a test imposed by him directly. Setsuna wondered if this was a true clash of wills, then rushed to strike. Blazer answered with equal force, their hands colliding, the impact shaking through the spirit world. In the real world, Lionel battled Zagan. His blade clipped one of Zagan's feathers, earning a grudging remark about his skill. Zagan then sensed alchemy in use, rose high, and roared for everyone to clear the area. His strike came down, but a doll intercepted, taking the blow. Morgana tore Leo from the house, bursting through the wall to escape. Lionel thought Zagan should have been drained after unleashing so many grand techniques, but instead his mana only swelled stronger. Confused, he watched Zagan press harder. Zagan mocked him, telling him not to slow down. Lionel prepared to counter, but Morgana stepped in, her magic halting his attack. She scolded them both for shaking apart another's home with their fighting. Lionel, exasperated, asked if she would at least allow him a moment's rest, but Morgana dismissed the idea, saying the young needed to keep struggling. As Zagon readied to strike her, Lionel leapt forward, slashing again. Zagon caught the blow, his ability breaking it down as Morgana sensed its disintegration. Leo, watching, realized too late that this was the spirit magic mentioned in the reports, and cursed herself for not seeing its futility sooner. Zagon prepared another strike, but Lionel slammed a punch into him. Zagon retreated, warning Leo to keep Lionel restrained, then countered with a heavy hit that sent Lionel crashing out of the house. Morgana studied Zagon's technique, beginning to suspect his ability nullified all magic, stripping him of weakness and letting him slip through any attack. She wondered if this was some rare skill, or if it demanded a hidden condition. Morgana thought of striking at close range with magic, hoping speed would leave him no room to react. She made the waters of the lake surge into a massive wave, ready to unleash it. Outside, Leo noticed the attack was aimed directly at him from below, yet showed no concern as he raised his defense. He figured that if it failed, she would be forced to reveal her last resort. Morgana lifted the water higher, intending to wrap it around him and drag them both down with it. Leo sensed her plan and judged it excessive, though not foolish. He struck the wave with his power, shattering it and turning it into a storm of falling rain. He noted that he had trained as well. Morgana, taken aback, guessed he was blending long-range magic with disintegration. Leo confirmed and claimed it would be enough as a token for the underworld. He readied his strike, announcing that his task was done. Before the blow landed, Setsuna burst in and threw a punch. Morgana understood instantly. Setsuna had overcome the spirit. Lionel saw him wrapped in searing flames, yet controlling them so they didn't consume the forest. Zeg and Nobu, watching, said Setsuna was not like Leo. Blazer considered whether these enemies were worth burning, given the scene. Setsuna, firm, declared they were strong foes, but he would not lower his guard. Blazer recalled their earlier fight, admitting Setsuna had taken the win, though his modest stance didn't seem fitting. Setsuna remembered the moment in the spirit world when Blazer's strike had staggered him. Both fighters had been drained, but Blazer respected his relentless will. He saw Setsuna trembling, yet still smiling, face strained but spirit unbroken, convinced of his victory. Blazer prepared another strike, remarking that Setsuna showed great confidence for a fragile human. Setsuna answered that Blazer's strength explained his flawless record, but that same strength was also his flaw, noting Blazer's power and its weakness. Blazer questioned the meaning, and Setsuna explained, he had faced loss and despair many times, but from the bottom, he learned how to rise again. No matter how harsh the trial, his spirit would not shatter, and his will would bring him victory. He readied himself, declaring this would be Blazer's first loss. Blazer rose, declaring it would be Setsuna's final one. They clashed with all they had. Time passed. Blazer marveled at Setsuna's strength, admitting his expectations had been broken. He accepted Setsuna's victory, wondering when he had grown so strong that defeat seemed certain. Setsuna answered that in battle, his will surged higher, and Blazer's blazing resolve flowed into him like fire. Blazer realized it had happened without him noticing and acknowledged Setsuna as an ally worthy of his trust. He extended his hand. Their fists met, and Setsuna thanked him for granting his power. Blazer dismissed the thanks and urged him to go. Setsuna nodded, turned, and faced Zagan. Blazer warned him to watch out for Zagan's claws. Setsuna explained that anything Zagan touched had its magic drained. He recalled that Zagan was the only apostle he had faced before returning, wielding the authority of devouring everything. Zagan nullified spells and absorbed mana from any foe he cut. He had wiped out the Northern Kingdom alone, a nation famed for advanced alchemy gear, while stealing every shred of their magic. Zagan, noticing Setsuna's awareness of his power, admitted he didn't know how Setsuna had learned it, but claimed there was no chance of victory against him. Leo, trying to steady himself through pain, noted that Setsuna's speed had grown far beyond before. Setsuna was surprised Leo could still stand, suspecting he had softened the damage through magic integration, proof of Leo's growth. Zagan told Leo to stand back and leave Setsuna to him. Leo stepped away to watch. Setsuna remembered how he once defeated Zagan by exploiting his advantage with long-range magic. Now Zagan specialized in close combat, where even a single strike could kill. But Setsuna was different as well. He parried Zagan's blow and countered with a side punch, forcing him back, then pressed forward without pause. Zagan was shaken, declaring it impossible for Setsuna to outpace him. Setsuna thought that blending Blazer's flames with his own body boost gave him greater speed. Lionel realized Setsuna was now mixing melee techniques with spirit fire, moving fast enough to land repeated hits on Zagan. Morgana, unimpressed but watchful, noted how quickly he had learned to control the fire's reach with such precision. Zagan bellowed, releasing crushing pressure across the field. He mocked Setsuna for cloaking himself in fire, claiming it only made him easier to absorb. He boasted of feeling the surge of power, calling himself the devourer of all. Setsuna smiled, curious to see what would happen. Zagan lunged, landing a strike. Setsuna had baited him, moving closer to the tree, slipping aside as Zagan attacked. A sudden burn spread through Zagan's body. He called out for Morgana's water to douse him, but then froze, confused at what was happening. Setsuna explained that spirit fire couldn't be consumed like normal mana. Zagan might absorb it, but without control it became poison, eating him from within. The power of a spirit wasn't something beings like him could swallow so easily. Zagan roared, accusing Setsuna of setting him up. He turned to Leo, demanding he erase the magic inside his body. Leo answered with sarcasm, reminding him that moments ago Zagan had ordered him to stay back, but now wanted his help. Then Leo struck Zagan instead, his attack spilling over and catching Morgana as well. Zagan staggered, confused at Leo's actions. Before realizing the truth, Leo had betrayed him. Leo made it clear, saying the mission came first. Morgana was useless, and Zagan's sharp sense of smell had served its purpose to track her, but his beast instincts had become intolerable. Leo had acted as required. Zagan, enraged, swore he would never forgive him and vowed to drag them all down with him. For his master's sake, he would kill every last one. As Zagan readied his strike, Setsuna unleashed spirit flames, cutting the air with a blazing slash. Zagan spat a stone in response, but the flames tore through it, reducing his body to ashes. Only a black gemstone remained. Setsuna stared at it, then turned to call for Leo, but realized he had already vanished. He muttered Leo's name, carving it into memory, promising that no matter where Leo fled, he would find him and end him without mercy when they crossed again. Morgana collapsed. Setsuna rushed to her side, insisting she hold on and promising immediate treatment. She explained that disintegration magic had been used on her body, and saving her was impossible. Lionel and Setsuna were crushed by the weight of it. With a faint smile, Morgana told them not to grieve. She said Setsuna was the close combat mage acknowledged by the spirit flame, and that she had something to pass on. She handed him a tool containing her spirit, saying it would help him grasp the flow of water and the sea. Setsuna trembled, begging her not to speak as if leaving a memento. He refused to believe there was no way to save her. But Morgana had already passed. Setsuna gently laid her body down, heavy with grief. He muttered to himself that no matter how strong he became, if he couldn't protect what mattered, then strength meant nothing. Lionel stepped closer, trying to steady him. He reminded him that life was uncertain. No one could predict what came next. No matter how strong someone became, humans were flawed. What mattered was to keep facing hardship without breaking, to keep fighting as long as breath remained. He hoped Setsuna would grasp that truth. At that moment, a girl approached and patted Setsuna's head. She chided him for being tricked, warning that speaking of keepsakes only brought bad luck. Setsuna froze, stunned, as she revealed she was the real Morgana. Lionel stood speechless beside him. Morgana explained that the old woman they had known was nothing more than an alchemical doll, like the rest of her servants. But unlike them, Morgana had embedded her soul into that vessel, so its emotions and strength carried her essence. She mocked Setsuna as a fool, saying it was just experience. Lionel, still shaken, asked if the old woman had been nothing but a decoy. Morgana confirmed, calling the doll the alchemist's masterpiece. She asked if they were all shocked by the revelation. Setsuna admitted he had never seen a doll so lifelike. He remembered that even in the spirit world she had appeared as the old woman. Morgana replied that within the spirit realm, appearances could shift at will. Lionel questioned if calling herself Morgana wasn't going too far. Morgana revealed pointed ears, proving she was an elf. She explained that elves lived far longer than humans and asked Setsuna to guess her age. Lionel pushed Setsuna to try, saying he was good at that sort of thing. Setsuna refused outright, knowing it was a trap with no safe answer. Morgana laughed and gave the answer herself. She was 300 years old. Setsuna noted that she hadn't answered in numbers and pressed if that meant she had taken part in the Great Magic War. Morgana smirked, hinting at his interest in the war. She said she could share it, but not without a price. Setsuna, eager for knowledge, offered money. Morgana scoffed, saying it wasn't about coin and that this place wasn't safe for such talk. She led them toward the lake, where the erased history could be spoken freely. At the lake, Morgana tossed stones across the water, trying to skip them. On her third throw, the stone sank, and she cursed at failing to break the 90-year streak. Setsuna glanced at Lionel, asking if he alone struggled to keep up with her pace. Lionel admitted he was in the same spot and guessed Morgana carried plenty of stress. Morgana exhaled and pulled them back to the subject of the Great War. She explained that the world housed many races: humans, dwarves, beastmen, and others. Among them, elves had lifespans so long they seemed endless. They lived close to nature, often bonding with spirits, which gave them mastery of spirit magic. While some humans revered elves and spirits, not all saw them favorably. Some elves twisted this reverence, straying from their paths. One elf, worshipped by a nation, bent its king to his will and spread spirit magic to his followers, sparking a war to dominate the world. Morgana asked if that war fit the name Great Magic War. Lionel pointed out how blind faith mixed with power turned dangerous. Morgana continued, saying both sides bled heavily until the elf's forces fell. From then on, elves were hunted as corruptors of the mind. Setsuna realized that ancient magic was a label invented to hide the truth, that there was magic that bound spirits. Morgana confirmed it, saying that was the reason for the name. Lionel, still trying to take it all in, asked if she hated humans for what they had done to her kind. She admitted she once had, but not anymore. When pressed, she admitted she still kept her distance, since even 2 centuries later, some still wanted elves dead. The hatred left behind by the Great War never faded, which was why she disguised her identity. Setsuna asked why she showed her true self now. Morgana answered that Dana had trusted him, and Setsuna had proven worthy of that trust. She had seen him break down, and it felt time to reveal herself. Setsuna snapped back that he hadn't cried. His thoughts turned to the war, how elves had used spirit magic to defeat one apostle, but the price was high. Forbidden magic had been used, and many lives were lost. The 3 of them then set about restoring the forest, fixing the damage their fight had left. When the work was done, it was time to part. Morgana thanked them for cleaning up. Setsuna said he was glad to have met her. Lionel asked what she would do next. She replied that since her location was now exposed, she would have to vanish again, and they might never see her anymore. Setsuna stopped her, asking if when humanity was on the edge, he could call on her strength. He bowed, humbly asking for her aid. Morgana dismissed it as pushy, but said when the time came, he only needed to ask. At times, she might send him letters. Setsuna thanked her for that. Blazer appeared suddenly, mocking Morgana and warning that next time he would burn her to ashes. Morgana splashed water in front of him, teasing if he wanted another soaking. He turned his head away, and the 2 separated, waving casually as they went in different directions. Setsuna mounted his lizard, memories pulling him back to a rainy day long ago outside a building. A woman had approached with an umbrella and a towel, telling him that gaining immense power didn't mean he had become truly strong. Gaeta, confused, had asked her to explain. She said power could drive people insane if misused. What mattered was wielding it properly, without arrogance, and without letting it control him, not simply piling on more strength. Riding away now, Setsuna understood her meaning. He was determined to use the spirit's power wisely and in the name of justice. With Lionel at his side, he headed back toward the academy. The scene shifted to Satan and Pucca. Satan told Pucca the preparations were done and it was time to begin. Leo stood before them. Pucca pointed out that he had failed to kill Setsuna and had even abandoned a comrade. That was neglect of duty. Leo denied it, pleading with Pucca, insisting he had completed the mission by killing Morgana. Satan pressed him, asking if he had checked to confirm her death. Leo faltered, admitting that given the level of the attack, she had to be dead. Satan glared, reminding him the order had been to secure Morgana's death, not Setsuna's. He added that Leo should have at least returned with Zagan's corpse. With that, they could have raised an undead beast wielding Zagan's power. Leo explained that Setsuna had knowledge of Zagan's ability, information that hadn't been part of the plan. Satan dismissed the excuse, saying it only meant Setsuna was hiding something. Pucca, curious, asked if Leo's undead tool had also been destroyed. Then his eyes caught a distant figure, Giovanni. Satan called out to Tsukuyomi, asking if she could take charge. She replied she had no other choice. The timing was almost right. Tsukuyomi, the eighth apostle, carried the power to revive the dead. Meanwhile, Setsuna and Lionel traveled under a clear sky. Lionel noted they were half a day from the academy. Setsuna wondered about the others. Lionel worried, guessed Drago was overtraining. Setsuna agreed, then caught himself, realizing he had started caring about those around him. Lionel asked if things had been different before. Setsuna admitted they had. Back then, he only thought about training himself. He believed that by perfecting long-range magic, he could win every fight alone, without anyone's help. Others were just background noise, and he had almost no friends. But now things had changed. He had comrades he could trust, and he had learned that strength existed in many other forms beyond long-range magic. The magic control Setsuna had refined before returning also served him well in close combat. Lionel noted that magic control came through relentless training, not just talent or aptitude. He judged that Setsuna's level wasn't something built in a few short years. To him, it looked like the result of years of harsh discipline, which explained how Setsuna had risen to be the strongest in the world. Lionel speculated that such strength had to be tied to an unimaginable past. They paused for a break, and Setsuna pulled out the items given by Morgana. He unfolded a note and saw it would be useful, deciding to save it for when the moment came. Blazer studied the necklace, pointing out that it carried the trace of a water spirit. Setsuna knew Morgana had passed it on so he could form a connection. He concentrated, calling for the spirit, questioning if his voice could reach her. The locket spoke his name. Setsuna froze, hearing that the spirit had been observing alongside Morgana all this time. She told him that, if he could endure her trial, she would lend him her strength. Setsuna doubted if it was real, but the spirit cut him short, reminding him that the true test would come in battle, and his thoughts jumped to the looming fight with Blazer. She assured him the trial wasn't meant to crush him, but to force growth. Setsuna asked himself what she meant by moving. The spirit confessed she was weary of the spiritual world and wanted a new perspective. Blazer scoffed, surprised at her leniency, adding that he never got along with her. She countered that she never disliked him. Setsuna found her friendliness unlike Blazer's attitude, though he still puzzled over her talk of moving someone. Lionel set a hand on his shoulder, saying he was lucky, then added he had a tale that could stir him. A fiery story of friendship meant to bring tears. The spirit grew curious about this story. Lionel continued, saying it was about the heroes who had saved the country decades ago. Names like the Indestructible Blade and Wallace the Iron Walls. A great story, he claimed. As Lionel kept telling it, night settled and Setsuna drifted off to sleep. When he woke, Lionel was still deep in conversation with the water spirit. Setsuna decided to leave that for later, once they were back at the academy. At the academy, Setsuna was with Carol, Drago, and Layla. Layla mentioned something that had been on her mind, and Drago asked Setsuna if anything had happened during the break. Setsuna brushed it off as nothing more than training. Layla suggested they visit an art museum next time, saying she had a friend who knew a lot about it. Setsuna agreed, thinking it would be useful. Drago proposed they all go together, and Carol confirmed, taking charge of the plan. Later, they all went to the museum. After the visit, on the way back, Setsuna walked with Drago, who pulled off his shirt to show off his body. Carol unleashed her flames, showing the force of her inferno. Blazer held his ground and revealed his own power. Setsuna, though, remained distracted by thoughts of the water spirit. The focus shifted to his training beneath the world tree. While sharpening his reflexes, Blazer pointed out that Setsuna had pushed his power to a level that felt like fighting beside a partner. He had broken past human limits in a short time. Setsuna admitted he never expected such words from Blazer and insisted there was no need for concern as the new technique was close to completion. Looking around, Setsuna caught sight of the falling snow and realized winter had already arrived. The thought hit him that the coming incident was near, yet he still hadn't sealed a contract with the water spirit. Gathering his things, he muttered that the trial had to wait, since something else demanded his attention. Blazer asked if he was certain the training was over. Setsuna answered that the timing was right, but he could no longer ignore the strength of the sacred tree. Their practice had drained vast amounts of mana, and it would take years for the tree to recover. Setsuna bowed toward it, giving thanks for its role in helping him master Blazer's strength. With the year's end closing in, Setsuna knew there was no time for rest. Blazer wondered if this meant a major battle was near. Setsuna confirmed it, recalling that before his return, humanity had been crushed by the evil god. and 4 main causes led to the downfall. One of those would surface within 7 days. Blazer pressed him, asking what the 4 causes were. Setsuna explained that among the invasions carried out by the evil god, 4 stood out as the most devastating. The Great Vow of the Dragon's Silence, the collapse of the Magus army, the sudden vanishing of the royal capital in a single night, and the stirring of the underworld's army within 7 days. On top of that, the abrupt surge of countless undead inflicted heavy losses on both the Magus force and the civilians. Blazer questioned whether the undead were really that much of a threat. Bahat countered that ordinary undead would not be dangerous, but these were different. The ones raised as enemies had once been heroes, figures revered across the world. A strong power had twisted them into these unique undead. At first, he suspected Giovanni of being the apostle responsible, but doubted Giovanni had the strength to command an army from the underworld. The coming event was a grave robbery in Eldon, Setsuna's hometown, where the tombs of heroes would be desecrated. People assumed their treasures were the target, but Blazer pointed out that the real prize was the corpses themselves. Setsuna resolved to reach the royal cemetery before the night of the crime to stop it. Later, while eating with friends, Layla asked Drago if he planned to return home during the winter break. Drago confirmed it, explaining his father intended to pass down the family's secret close combat techniques. Carol said she would be spending time with Fenrir in the frozen plains of her family's territory and wondered if Blazer would accompany her. Blazer refused. Layla was stunned to learn that Carol's family owned land at all, something she could hardly picture. Carol then turned to Setsuna, asking about his own plans. He sat quiet, lost in thought, and when pressed again, looked startled, as if pulled back from somewhere else. Layla noticed his distraction and suspected he was hiding something dangerous from them, something he couldn't reveal. Carol leaned toward her and whispered that Setsuna secretly had plenty of female admirers, and if Layla didn't act soon, she might lose him. Layla denied it, but Carol insisted there was no need to hide her feelings. Layla switched the topic and asked Setsuna about his origins. He answered that he had grown up in an orphanage in the Eldina region. Layla remarked that this was close to her family's inn. Overhearing, Carl jumped into the conversation, commenting on her family's business. Setsuna asked who he was. Carl, annoyed, introduced himself as a noble. Then he turned to Layla, inviting her to join his salon, boasting of luxury vacations far beyond anything an inn could provide.